Welcome home, my little hellhounds. Tonight is the mega Halloween compilation. We've got new stories and old stories, and not only that, we have several guests tonight. We've got Gamma, Akatubi, Jessica, Danny Dreadful, and Dark Horse Tales. If you want to watch more of theirs, there will be links down below. Now settle in for the night and get ready to get scared. And don't forget to like and subscribe if you like these scary stories. If you like these longer videos, then let me know in the comments. Now, let's get right into it. My girlfriend dies every day. Posted by MTP6921. I'm trapped in the worst day of my life and I can't get out of it. Every day I know my girlfriend is going to die no matter what I do. The end result is that she dies. Each morning I wake up to do a quick assessment of myself, then of my long-term girlfriend, Kathy, and we both appear fine. However, the day before she always ends up killed in some unforeseeable manner. I have tried every approach, from telling her in the morning that something horrible will happen to her that day, to telling her nothing, and either which way she dies by the end of the day. Her dying has happened so many times that we might literally be 100 years old, but we literally haven't aged a day past 29. The worst part is that she might have a small flicker of remembrance from the previous days. However, on the other hand, I remember vividly each and every of those 100 years of daily horror show rituals of Kathy being killed. There was even one day where we forced a bank manager to lock us both inside a bank safe, and due to the lack of oxygen, Kathy died and I only passed out. I sometimes wonder if I'm the one who is being punished for being subjected to her daily deaths. In a way, I don't want tomorrow to come, because then she'll really be gone, so every day I live like it's her last. There's no alarm clock in our room, so the only thing that usually wakes us up is the sun, or the sound of a car whizzing by our house. After I assess the both of us to make sure that we are alive, then I get the immediate thought of how Kathy is going to die today. It's a shame I have to think like this, but when something has happened like clockwork for so long, I can't be naive to the fact. This morning I wonder if I should change my game plan to escape her death. For whatever reason, March 18th had been the date and we can't move forward from it. The 18th is an even day, which isn't really synonymous with anything special, so I don't understand why this date was chosen. Watching someone you love die a peaceful death is heartbreaking, but watching her die violently is heartbreaking and traumatic. I've set every booby trap in the house possible to try and stop a would-be assailant, but they always manage to get to her, or the booby traps wound up killing her. So this morning I just looked at her and think, how is this going to be any different from any other day? She is only half awake and she has no idea that this is her last day, based on the years we were born we're only 29 years old, but because of this never-ending day, we're really 129 years old. The oddest part about this whole thing is that death doesn't want me, and I'm not even sure if it wants Kathy. Maybe there's a glitch or something where death has changed its mind on Kathy, but it can't reverse its course. Regardless, I'm stuck in this horrible parallel universe where I remember her dying every day. I'd already sent out SOS messages on every social media platform, and the only thing that would happen is that I would get arrested for conspiracy to attempt murder, and later that day I would learn that she died, and the next day would start all over again. March 18th is also a Thursday morning, and eventually I'll convince her to skip work. I think today we'll do nothing but just lie in bed all day. There has been instances where she has been killed at 8:30 AM, so I'm not guaranteed a full day with her. As she wakes up, she says, "Good morning, hun." I respond, "Good morning, honey." She says, "Aren't you going to get ready for work?" I respond, "No, we should both just take a day off work today." She says, "I can't, I have this important meeting at 10 AM that I have to attend." After doing this routine for 100 years, I tell her, please reschedule the meeting and stay here. She reluctantly agrees, and we do nothing more than just talk. Yesterday to her is March 17th, but yesterday to me was March 18th, where she got hit by a car. I block out those thoughts and just look into her eyes. She looks so innocent and pure, and I question why, whatever controls this universe, would do such a horrible thing to her each and every day. I continue to look into her eyes, and she blushes. She asks me what I'm looking at, and I tell her, the most beautiful creature on this earth. She giggles and tells me to stop. The poor thing has only known pain and tragedy for nearly her whole life. She was adopted from an orphanage in Czechia to a good-willed American household, but her adopted father died when she was 6, and her adoptive mother turned to alcoholism. Kathy's childhood was cold from constant bullying from other kids, and she felt so isolated because she was an only child. So as I look into her eyes, I think, how could someone go through so much and still be so nice to me? We continue our small talk, and I entertain any desire she wants, including marriage. When we met, when we were 24, and I made it perfectly clear that I never wanted kids, but I would get married. So we talked and talked about getting married, and she joked that I needed to propose to her, and I responded I would, but it needed to be a surprise. I entertained every wedding idea she could ever imagine. Nothing was too expensive for her. I had already proposed to her and took her to City Hall close to 50 years ago, so I know this will have no bearings on her living or dying, or tomorrow coming or going. But I just like to see her smile. I like to see her face light up. I like to think that maybe this day will be different. I ask her what she wants to eat, and she jokingly says waffles with real maple syrup from the French restaurant in Philadelphia. I say sure and get on the phone. She looks at me completely confused. When I bargain with the hostess to deliver it to our house for $200, she tells me I'm crazy, and I tell her that I love her though. I have the worst case of PTSD known to man from watching Kathy die for 100 years straight, but I've learned to block it out each day. There was a year where I would just hide in my pillow and say there's no sense. She's going to die anyways, but not anymore. Now I just try to look at it as a good or bad dream, depending on my mindset. So we continue to talk, and I steer her away from the trivial worries. We even talk about the basketball game tonight, where I could recite every single player's moves. I really just want her to be happy, just in case tomorrow becomes March 19th and she's dead. In a way, this would be her hospice without the morphine, and today I'm not going to think of any type of elaborate ruse to try to prevent the inevitable of her being killed, because whatever happens will happen. This day really does feel special. Maybe I finally learned something over the years, and maybe today I will finally end and become the 19th. We will even start doing guess what song this is from the 90s and early 2000s. Laughter can be so contagious, and I'm glad I never lost the ability to laugh. I hear a knock at the door, and I tell her that breakfast must be here, which makes her smile. I go to the door and pay the young lad that agreed $200. She stays in bed and continues to eat while we joke around and have fun. She asks me, "Why do you love me so much?" I respond, "Because you're so beautiful." She says, "Oh, that's so sweet," and giggles. "It's not because of my constant worrying or my 2010 Honda Civic I drive." I jokingly respond, "Your Civic is definitely a turn on, but it's just you that I like." As she turns to tell me something, in her face goes blank. Then she slumps over into the pillow and starts to have convulsions. I immediately called 911 and they rushed over. The paramedics asked me if she had any history of seizure disorder or drug use or anything similar. I told them no, and they rushed her to the hospital. Later that day, the cause of death was listed as cyanide poisoning, and I questioned every person at the restaurant to try to figure out why, but no one fessed up, and like every other day, eventually I automatically passed out no later than midnight, to wake up again on March 18th. As senseless as yesterday was, I had to forget about it, because today was a brand new day. I did everything the same as yesterday. Regarding what I said to Kathy and missing work, we talked about our wedding, and I even proposed to her. Every day was unique, and this day was going to be unique, because when she said yes to my proposal and she got on top of me and was just so overtaken with glee, we continued to fool around, and neither of us reached for protection, which either of us would have done for the last 100 years. We both got caught up in the moment, and we just threw caution to the wind. The rest of the morning we did nothing but lay down in bed together. I had no motivation to see her get hit by a car, or shot, or even stabbed. So we did nothing but just lay down in bed, though I tried the whole fasting thing over 100 times already. The waffle thing was just still fresh on my mind, and I convinced her not to eat anything. So we did absolutely nothing all day but make stupid noises at each other and play mindless guessing games. I was amazed that we had made it past 8 PM, but I remembered an instance where it was 11:52 PM and she fell off the bed and hit her head and died. So I knew at any moment death was going to show its ugly face once more, in one way or another, and I just hope it's the quick kind, where I don't watch her have a seizure for half an hour or suffocate for her last breath of air. Hopefully someone will come into the room with a gun and just shoot her in the head, and hopefully she won't even see it coming. Like the waffle poisoning incident and the countless assassins, I never knew who pays those people to carry out those deeds, or Is it something that was just written by whoever created this universe and decided to change their mind without properly pressing the undo button? Regardless, we finished watching the basketball game and it's now 10:30 p.m. We are both wide awake and she brings up tomorrow, which I've learned to just say yes to whatever she says. We do nothing more than just talk about the little things that brought us together and how lost she would be without me, of her mother dying of alcohol abuse 2 years into our initial relationship. We just talk and talk and talk and talk, and I try to think of her as a kid who has terminal cancer, who will die in 3 months, but wants to be a ballerina when she grows up. In the corner of my eye, I glance over at the TV, and it says 11:59 p.m, and my heart sinks down to my feet. I've learned to be cautiously optimistic, like when you scratch off a ticket and you purposely get 2 matching, win $1,000 a month for the rest of your life, but you know the third will never come. So as Kathy continues to talk, I block her out and just count down in my head from 1 to 60. By the time I got to 37, I said, "Holy shit, Kathy, it's 12 a.m. It's March 19th. Then I ran around the house like a bloody fool while I checked on her every 5 seconds to make sure she was still alive. About 8 weeks later, I figured out what got us out of March 18th, when Kathy surprised me with a positive pregnancy test. I couldn't believe that to get her pregnant was to get us to March 19th. Fast forward 3 months, and as fate would have it, nothing can ever end that well. It seemed like I was destined to get Kathy pregnant because I had a ticking time bomb within my body. I was just diagnosed with an inoperable brain tumour, and I have elected to forego treatment and will subsequently die in a matter of weeks. My last testament to Kathy was our child, and now she won't be alone. Cravings, posted by Nicole Plow. You know that feeling you get a month or so into your new diet and you are craving something thick and delicious? Well, that happened to me last night. At first I tried to reason with myself that I didn't need it. Hell, I made a pretty filling meal that night for dinner. The only problem was that it wasn't enough to satiate my appetite. Bear in mind that I am a 6'3", 350-pound male with large biceps, so I'm incredibly hard to fill up, especially when I get my cravings. After about an hour or so of trying and failing to fight the cravings off, I let out a long huff and give in. That night I procured what I needed in order to make it. I'm a hunter, and so was my father. In fact, I learned my expert hunting skills from him. Anyway, so I catch it, kill it, and bring it home for a real supper. Cooking the meal was a breeze, as I had done it before numerous times. Preheat the oven to about 350 degrees. Season the meat good. Plop that sucker in for about 25 minutes if you want it good and rare. The only way to cook it really, in my humble opinion. Sitting on the stove was some pasta and greens. The only drawback is the inevitable complaints from my girlfriend about the mess that I made while making it. She claims that I can make it and leave the kitchen not looking like a disaster zone. Why can't you? But once she takes a big bite of the meal that I had made, there's not one single complaint to come out of her for the rest of the night. Anyway, so after the timer goes off, I check it, pull it out and leave it to rest for a total of 20 minutes. I do this to keep the juices flowing within it. Afterwards, I add the cheese to the pasta and get out the big heavy duty plates for me and my girlfriend Michelle. She works a night shift over at the gas station and will be home here pretty soon. I survey the mess and cringe a little bit. If she sees that much blood all over the kitchen, she'll do more than growl at me tonight. So I clean it all up and make sure to save her an extra ear to go with her dinner tonight. Later, she gets home and we eat our fill. It was good, but I tells ya, human travellers are a mess to cook, start to finish. How I Survived the Sleep School, posted by Nicole Plow. The other day, my friends and I were telling each other spooky stories before going to bed. That night, I heard it, the story about a little boy lost inside of a school that he could not escape from. Terrified, I went for my closet containing the rosary my grandmother had given me before she passed away that spring. I prayed with it for hours. I said God's true name aloud, asking him to protect me. Then I went to sleep. When I awoke, I was inside of the school, but I still had my rosary, along with a ball of red string. I tied the beginning around my waist, as it was so long, and proceeded to wander the halls in search of the room with the key. I heard the footsteps and said 5 Hail Marys, and the sounds suddenly ceased. I managed to find the room with the key, but something was blocking the doorway. It was the most frightening image that I'd ever seen. It told me that my friends were already dead, and that I was soon to join them. The thing lunged at me, but a white light started to glow from my rosary, the cross. The light scared off the demon thing, and I was able to enter the classroom and find the key. I heard my friends call out to me, but something unseen pushed me along despite my initial protestations. There was the exit door. I put the key in and unlocked it. I was greeted by a bright light and awoke to find it was the next day. When I got to the school, my friends were missing. I asked around, but nobody would give me a straight answer as to where they were. They just looked at me with a mix of concern and deep unease. I tried to text them during lunch, but got no response. Later I would find out that they had died in their sleep on the same night.
They came to the river to bathe in its shallows. It was a hot, sticky day in mid-July, and Gabriel was weary and moody. Marta seemed more beautiful than usual that day. Her dark auburn hair blazed and smoldered like a long-forgotten, but still full of life, fire, under the hot mid-afternoon sun, and her green eyes shone and glistened like the most precious of emeralds. Gabriel was more in love with her than ever. They laid in the wild, tall grasses and wildflowers beside the river, both looking up at the wispy, fluffy white clouds, imagining magical fairy tale lands where they could just be together for all eternity. Marta suddenly sat up. "I'm so hot, my love. Come, let's swim. The water looks so beautiful and cool." Gabriel let out a lazy laugh and watched his lady take her simple cotton dress and shoes off. All right. Don't be so impatient, my darling Marta. Just one more kiss, please." He reached out his arm to pull her to him, but was too late, for she was up and laughing as she spun around, her flaming hair dancing as she moved and dainty bare feet splashing in the water. Come swim with me, Gabriel. The water is so lovely, so cool." He laughed merrily, all his moodiness forgotten with this lovely day and in the company of his muse, his beloved. They swam together for 2 blissful hours, splashing, diving, exploring. Marta was a strong swimmer, and Gabriel, although himself a fair swimmer, struggled at times to keep up with her. "You are my little mermaid. That is why you have bewitched me with your siren song." He laughed, childlike and carefree. "No, not a mermaid, my sweet Gabriel." Marta smiled and kissed him tenderly. Something in her countenance looked sad and misplaced on such a lovely day and happy moment. Marta was sad. She was wonderfully, deeply, and truly in love with Gabriel, but the dark secret that she had to keep from him hung over her like a black cloud, threatening to ruin their future and happiness. Indeed, lives. But she had no choice. She couldn't help who or what she was. The family curse wasn't her fault, but it would be her fate until the day she died. That was why she led him to the river, away from her feeding lair in the middle of the dark wood, and all the bodies of local boys and young men savagely ripped apart and mutilated in the feeding frenzy of the she-wolf, and that is why she had to make sure Gabriel was home safe and sound before darkness fell and the July wolf moon rose. She loved him.
I'm doing my best, pretending to be my true self. Written by Short Story 1. I am doing my best pretending to be myself, pretending to be my true self, who is kind and thoughtful. Then when I meet someone who seems unique, I just have this urge to stop pretending to be my true self and just start checking to see how many organs they have and wanting to be inside their skin so I know what it's like to be inside their shoes. It's a tough battle, pretending to be myself, my true self, the one that everyone will love and cherish. When I am pretending to be myself, everyone invites me to weddings, parties, and other sociable events. The other day I met an old man who seems like he had lived such a wild kind of life, and I was doing my best pretending to be myself with him as I started to chat with him on the bus. Then I stopped pretending to be myself, my true self, and I opened him and I enjoyed checking how many organs he has. I was jealous, as he had 4 kidneys and 2 extra faces next to his heart. And then I wore his skin, and I could feel the life experiences he had lived. Then I went back to pretending being myself again, and I was still wearing the skin that belonged to this old man over myself. I felt so bad, and I couldn't believe that I had failed at pretending to be myself, my true self, and I took off the skin that belonged to the old man and threw it in some canal. When I am pretending to be myself, everyone trusts me, and they tell me things that they keep deep inside them. There are times where I like pretending to be myself, because being nice and gentle can lift bad moods to good moods and change the scene. I will feel horrified if certain individuals who I respect saw me when I wasn't pretending to be myself, my true self. Like last weekend, when I went up to some guy who seemed so interesting, and then I wanted to go and check how many organs he had inside of him, because I stopped pretending to be myself. He had the ordinary number of organs most people had. When I wore his skin to know what it feels like to be him, he was so ordinary. When I am pretending to be myself, my true self, everyone loves me and they feel safe around me. They will not want to be around me when I am not pretending to be myself.
My dad and uncle both owned a piece of land in our home country of Bulgaria. The land hasn't even got anything built on it, but it's just there. My dad wanted to build a chill resort there, and still had some things to buy, like hire workers and buy materials. So me and my friend group, which consists of 2 boys, me included, and 3 girls, decided to spend the weekend there, camping and having a laugh while also fishing. I am a pretty skilled fisherman, because my uncle taught me when I was little. Anyway, we got there around 8 PM and had to prepare everything before it got dark. Things like tents, campfire, table and chairs, and the grill. We settled before 10, got out the pork chops, and I cooked it. It was already 11 when we finished, and we decided to go for a night stroll through the woods. There was a gorgeous waterfall near our camp, so me, a girl who I will call Maria, and my best friend who I will call Chris got ready, and we left. The other 2 girls decided to stay behind. As we were strolling through the dark forest, I got an ominous feeling that something wasn't right. I felt like something was about to happen. Something disturbing. But I thought nothing of it. We reached the area of the waterfall. It was really beautiful, and I will attach a picture of it during daylight. We decided to go for a swim even though we didn't bring swimsuits. While I was just chilling in one corner, I saw something which almost made my heart go down my stomach. In the dark, there were a pair of eyes. Bright red ones, like the rear lights of a car, just looking at me. You have no idea how disturbing this was. Maybe it was an animal, but I have never seen an animal with eyes that red, even during the night. I just froze and looked over for Chris and Maria. Now, I should mention that they were very close friends. Too close, if you know what I mean. When I looked for them, they just weren't there. That meant I was left with this creature alone, in the middle of a pond, and also in the middle of the night. It just stood there. Eventually, Chris and Maria returned, and I got out of the water immediately. I told them in a panicked voice that we should leave right away. They followed me without questions, and I explained what I saw. Chris, who is a very chill guy, said that it was probably a deer. Only problem was that on this property or this part of the country, there were no deers, or for that matter, any animal that closely resembles the thing I saw. When I said this, he just shut up. We returned and I was considering going home or finding a new place to stay, but I decided it was midnight and there wasn't any time. Everyone was just too tired. But this would be a decision which I will come to regret. We all went to sleep in a single tent while the others were in doubles, like the two girls we had with us whose names were Anna and Victoria, and of course, Chris and Maria. Before I went to sleep, I went to pick up my rifle from the truck that we came in, as I did not feel safe. I was well prepared, so I gave each tent a hunting knife, my hobby is hunting, just in case anything would happen. I woke up from the urge to urinate. I looked at my watch and it said 3:45 AM. I got out and went to do my job near a tree. I should mention that we set up our camp in an open area, with tree lines about 20 to 25 metres away each and a shore south of it. When I was heading back to the tent, I looked over to the east tree line and saw something quite horrible. There standing was an at least 9 or 10 foot tall white figure, bald, with long skinny legs and arms out of hell. It stood there, watching. I froze and almost had a heart attack. The creature then proceeded to scream. A scream I'm sure none of you have ever heard before. A scream from hell. It started running on 4 legs towards the camp. I shouted, "Everyone get out!" I got in my tent, grabbed the rifle and fired 4 times at the creature. I wanted to paralyze the motherfucker right there and then. It stopped, screamed one more time, and went back into the woods. I think I wounded it. I was petrified. Everyone got out, extremely confused, but there was no time for explaining. I got in the truck and everyone followed me. I booted it out of there without looking back. Throughout the whole ride back home I was quiet, despite my friends asking me what on earth happened, but I was too paralysed by the experience that I couldn't talk. We got back to my house and spent the night there. Next morning I took Chris with me back to the camp to take her stuff. I didn't want the girls to know. I explained everything and he was in shock, almost vomited from what he heard. We got back and while Chris was packing everything, I went to the east side where the waterfall is and saw scratches on the trees from nails, like a bear did it. But I knew what did this, and it wasn't a bear. I told my dad and uncle what happened in every detail, even took them there to see the scratches, and 2 months later we sold the land to a guy with his pregnant wife who wanted to build a house for his family. I took him to one side after we had a meeting and mentioned what happened that night. After all, I don't even wish this on my worst enemy.
Yeah, it's just me here tonight, I say as I wash the few dishes that remained in the sink. The darkness outside seems held at bay by the big floodlight on the pole outside. The forest surrounding our little cabin looked like a green wave that's preparing to swallow our circle of humanity up forever, if it wasn't for that 120-watt bulb. I had the phone pressed against my ear with my shoulder, and I laughed as my boyfriend said something funny. The phone slipped towards the soapy water and I caught it just in time as something scratched at the door again. What? I asked as I walked over to the back door. No, they haven't come home yet. Uncle Rick doesn't usually like to be in the woods after dark, but Dad and Brad probably talked him into it. I opened the back door as another loud scratch came from it, and Benji walked in. For years the mutt has been in our family, and as he lumbers in, he wagged his tail and gave me a doggy grin. I wrinkled my nose with disgust when I noticed that he'd been rolling in something. There was a red-brown crust all over his right side, and at first I mistook it for blood. When I saw he wasn't limping, I figured it was mud, or worse yet, blood off some carcass he'd rolled around in out in the woods. I stared after him as he made his way towards the laundry room where his food bowls were, my boyfriend prattling away in my ear. Rick, I'm gonna have to call you back, I said, making my way towards the laundry room before Benji can roll in the clean laundry. Everything okay, babe? He asked, a little concerned. Yeah, but Ben's rolled in something and I don't want him to get it all over the house. Okay, well, stay safe. I love you, babe. Love you too, Rick. See you tomorrow. I hung up the phone and took a step towards the laundry room. I had just reached for the bristle brush by the sink when my phone blared from the countertop. I turned away from Benji and walked towards the phone, checking the caller ID to see who it is. Brad's smiling face was plastered across the screen, and I picked it up on the third ring. I figured it would be them telling me why they were so late. I didn't get 3 words out before I was immediately buffeted by a wall of static and Brad's frantic voice yelling as he cuts in and out. I held the phone a little away from my ear like it might explode and yelled, "Hello?" back at him until he heard me. Oh, thank God, Rach. We need you to call the sheriff. His tone was equal parts terror and fury, and I was immediately worried. What happened? Is everything okay? Uncle Rick is hurt pretty bad, and Dad's not in great shape either. Dad says to call the sheriff and an ambulance and lock the doors until we get there. Brad, what happened? Do it, Rachel. We'll be there in 5 minutes. Don't open the door until we get there. Then he hung up on me, and I was left looking at a silent brick. I tried the sheriff's office, but the phone just rang and rang before connecting me with static. The phone number for the ambulance is the same, and by this point I'm terrified. Was there a problem with the phones in town? Has some disaster happened out in the woods that spilled over into town? As I went to lock the door, I saw the familiar headlights of Dad's old pickup coming up the driveway. I flung it open instead to help them. Dad came out of the back, hoisting Uncle Rick under the arm, and Brad hopped out of the driver's seat and ran over to help him. Uncle Rick hung limply between them, and I could see at a glance that he is not in good shape. His flannel shirt and jeans were covered in blood, and though it was hard to tell, I thought his left arm might have been gone. Dad was covered in blood too, but it looks like some of it might be Uncle Rick's. He had 4 long claw marks running through his left eye, and it was swelling too badly for me to tell if the eye still works. Brad shouted at me to get the door, and I complied as all 3 of them came running into the living room. In the light, it's easy to tell how bad Uncle Rick is. His arm is gone. The sleeve had been used to make a tourniquet around the stump, and his breathing was very shallow as he lays on the couch in a state of unconsciousness. Brad said something about going back for the guns, but Dad shut him down and sent both of us to lock the doors. After the house was secure, Dad asked me if I'd call the sheriff or the ambulance. I told him about the strange static, and he swore loudly as he took his own cell out of his pocket. He dialed the number, and I can tell by his face that he's getting the same results. Finally, he swore again and threw the phone against the wall. I guess we're on our own then, he said, and it was the most hopeless I'd ever seen my daddy. Even when Mama died, he still kept a strong face for us. What is going on? I asked. What happened to Uncle Ricky? Dad looked over at Brad, and after a silent conference, Dad started to tell it. We'd been hunting most of the day, and we hadn't caught a damn thing. Something was scaring the game off. We heard it walking around a few times and thought it was a bear. Your Uncle Rick said it sure smelled like a bear, so when the sun started setting, we decided it was time to pack it in. We started getting everything together when, right out of the blue, a doe steps out into the meadow we'd been staking. She looks around, real skittish-like, and starts cropping grass quickly. She clearly smells whatever is making all the noise, but a deer has to eat, and she starts filling her belly as quickly as she can. Your uncle sights her up and drops her real easy, and we figured at least we'll have one thing to show off for the trip at least. No sooner do we get to the edge of the meadow when a big ol' something comes crashing out. It grabs our deer and bolts back into the woods like a bat out of hell. It kinda looked like a bear, I guess. The sun was setting and it was hard to tell, but it moved quicker than any bear I've ever seen. Brad and I were just gonna let it go, but Rick, was mad as I've ever seen him. He tears off after it saying how he's gonna take that thing home instead. So we follow him, not wanting to leave him in the woods alone after dark, and we chase this thing to its cave. At that point, I was sure it was a bear, so we go creeping in, trying to surprise it. As the sun sets behind us, we see this thing hunkered over the deer, and it weren't no bear. It's wolfing at the deer, just slurping it down, big mouthfuls, and Rick gets real pale and starts gibbering about how it's the thing he saw when we were kids. Wait, I interrupted. You've seen this thing before? Dad looked perturbed, but nodded. Yeah, that's why Rick hated going into the woods after dark. When we were teenagers, we were up in a stand hunting deer when Rick sights one right before sunset. He drops it and we're about to get it when this big thing comes up out of the woods and starts wolfing it down right there. Well, Rick's always had a temper, so he pops a shot at it. It pisses this thing off royally. It comes up to the bottom of our tree and starts clawing and pushing at it until it topples a good healthy tree, and we jump out just as it slams to the ground. And it was the thing that you saw today? Well, Dad hedged. It was almost dark when we shot the deer, and we never got too good a look at it. All I know is that it chased us out of the woods, and Rick wouldn't go hunting with me for 3 years after that. He paused for a minute to make sure I was out of questions before continuing the story. So with Rick gibbering, this thing looks up and sees us. I swear to you that it came up on its hind legs and walked like a man as it ran at us. Rick popped a shot off, probably just panic fire, but it just shrugged it off and landed on him. I saw his arm, rifle and all, go into its mouth, and I heard a crunch as it bit it clean off. Rick started screaming and we all started yelling. Before it can finish him off, though, Brad and I peppered him 4 or 5 times with buckshot. It must have dazed it 'cause it rolled off Rick with a loud shriek and stumbled back towards the cave. It sounded like a man screaming, Brad said, and Dad nodded before going on. It starts flailing around in pain, and we grabbed Rick and started dragging him back towards the truck. This thing came after us, and it sounded like it was crashing through trees the whole way. We couldn't move very fast. Each of us had an arm under Rick as we drug him along, and I swear it would have had us if it hadn't been for old Benji. My blood suddenly went cold. Benji? Yeah, Dad said, his voice dipping a little. Poor old guy. He'd been with us the whole time. He didn't seem to want anything to do with this thing, but when it jumped on us again and raked my face, he starts growling and lunges at it. I hear them tearing and snarling at each other, and we just hightailed it back to the truck. It's a wonder we ever found it in the dark. Poor old Benji. He sacrificed himself so we could get away. Both Brad and Dad looked forlorn, but I just shook my head. No, he didn't, I said with a little scoff. He's right here. Brad gave me a funny look. What are you talking about? He came wandering in not long before you guys did. That's when I remembered the blood on his fur. There was no way he could have outrun a truck, Hell, the only reason I hadn't questioned him being here is that I had forgotten that he'd gone with them. I looked back towards the kitchen door and it creaked open as Benji's friendly grin poked through the gap. He strolled into the living room, his fur still a mess of blood and mud, and glanced around the room as his tail wagged and his big old doggy smile stretched across his face. When he stood up on his hind legs, I thought for sure I was dreaming. Benji leapt across the living room, and when he hit the couch, he was no longer the cuddly mutt we'd all come to love. He was 200 pounds of sleek black fur and raking claws that reduced my family to sprays of blood and screams of mercy. I fell back from the scene, covering my eyes with my hands to block it all out. I could still hear every bone-wrenching ache, every blood-splattering swipe, and the watery gurgles of my family having their throats torn out. I was numb. My mind shrank away from the scene before me as I backpedaled until my back hit the wall of the cabin. I curled my knees up to my chest and put my head against my knees as I sank to the floor and waited for it to be over. I didn't care at that moment whether I lived or died. I only wanted it to end. I could feel myself crying as the living room became a killing field, and as it finally ended, I could hear the overpowering bray of my explosive sobs. My sobs stopped when I heard heavy footsteps walking toward me. I didn't look up, didn't want to look up, but when the creature's hot breath puffed against the top of my hair, I pulled my face away from my knees despite myself. His blood-smeared face was inches from mine, and I quickly buried my face back against my knees again. It was leaning over me, my family's blood pattering onto my skin, and it was all I could do not to pass out from terror. We stayed like that for several minutes until I couldn't take it anymore. I lifted my head and looked up into his semi-feline face and asked the question, "Why haven't you killed me?" His voice was high like a bee that's been caught in a jar, and it hurt my ears to listen. "Because you let me in. For that favor, I will give you a favor in return. Leave my woods before sunset tomorrow, and I will allow you to continue to exist. Stay, and you will share the fate of your kin." Then he turned and walked out of the house on 2 legs. I was gone before the sun came up. I threw my clothes in a bag, took the pickup my brother had been careless enough to leave the keys in, and drove. My phone rang a few times and I ignored it. The hardest was when Aunt Clara called, but after 3 days even she stopped calling. They likely assumed that I was dead too. I sold the truck before I left the state and haven't looked back. I drove until I couldn't see the forest anymore. Drove until I couldn't see 3 trees grouped close enough to obscure anything. And when the desert stretched before me, I finally stopped. I'll make my life here now. I have no intention of ever leaving the desert again. I don't know what forest this creature calls its own, and I never want to find out.
The Russian Sleep Experiment. Russian researchers in the late 1940s kept 5 people awake for 15 days using an experimental gas-based stimulant. They were kept in a sealed environment to carefully monitor their oxygen intake so the gas didn't kill them, since it was toxic in high concentrations. This was before closed-circuit cameras, so they had only microphones and a 5-inch thick glass porthole-sized window into the chamber to monitor them. The chamber was stocked with books, cots to sleep on but no bedding, running water and a toilet, and enough dried food to last all 5 for over a month. The test subjects were political prisoners deemed enemies of the state during World War II. Everything was fine for the first 5 days. The subjects hardly complained, having been promised falsely that they would be freed if they submitted to the test and did not sleep for 30 days. Their conversations and activities were monitored, and it was noted that they continued to talk about increasingly traumatic incidents in their past, and the general tone of their conversations took on a darker aspect after the 4-day mark. After 5 days, they started to complain about the circumstances and events that led them to where they were, and started to demonstrate severe paranoia. They stopped talking to each other and began alternately whispering to the microphones and one-way mirrored portholes. Oddly, they all seemed to think they could win the trust of the experimenters by turning over their comrades, the other subjects in captivity with them. At first, the researchers suspected this was an effect of the gas itself. After 9 days, the first of them started screaming. He ran the length of the chamber repeatedly, yelling at the top of his lungs for 3 hours straight. He continued attempting to scream, but was only able to produce occasional squeaks. The researchers postulated that he had physically torn his vocal cords. The most surprising thing about this behaviour is how the other captives reacted to it, or rather didn't react to it. They continued whispering to the microphones until the second of the captives started to scream. The 2 non-screaming captives took the books apart, smeared page after page with their own feces, and pasted them calmly over the glass portholes. The screaming promptly stopped. So did the whispering to the microphones. After 3 more days passed, the researchers checked the microphones hourly to make sure they were working, since they thought it impossible that no sound could be coming with 5 people inside. The oxygen consumption in the chamber indicated that all 5 must still be alive. In fact, it was the amount of oxygen 5 people would consume at a very heavy level of strenuous exercise. On the morning of the 14th day, the researchers did something they said they would not do to get a reaction from the captives. They used the intercom inside the chamber, hoping to provoke any response from the captives. They were afraid were either dead or vegetables. They announced, "We are opening the chamber to test the microphones. Step away from the door and lie flat on the floor, or you will be shot. Compliance will earn one of you your immediate freedom." To their surprise, they heard a single phrase in a calm voice response: "We no longer want to be freed." Debate broke out among the researchers and the military forces funding the research. Unable to provoke any more responses using the intercom, it was finally decided to open the chamber at midnight on the 15th day. The chamber was flushed of the stimulant gas and filled with fresh air, and immediately voices from the microphones began to object. 3 different voices began begging, as if pleading for the life of loved ones, to turn on the gas. The chamber was opened and soldiers sent in to retrieve the test subjects. They began to scream louder than ever, and so did the soldiers when they saw what was inside. 4 of the 5 subjects were still alive, although no one could rightly call the state that any of them in life. The food rations past day 5 had not been so much as touched. There were chunks of meat from the dead test subjects, thighs and chest, stuffed into the drain in the centre of the chamber, blocking the drain and allowing 4 inches of water to accumulate on the floor. Precisely how much of the water on the floor was actually blood was never determined. All 4 surviving test subjects also had large portions of muscle and skin torn away from their bodies. The destruction of flesh and exposed bone on their fingertips indicated that the wounds were inflicted by hand, not with teeth as the researchers initially thought. Closer examination of the position and angles of the wounds indicated that most, if not all of them, were self-inflicted. The abdominal organs below the ribcage of all 4 test subjects had been removed, while the heart, lungs and diaphragm remained in place. The skin and most of the muscles attached to the ribs had been ripped off, exposing the lungs through the ribcage. All the blood vessels and organs remained intact. They had just been taken out and laid on the floor, fanning out around the eviscerated but still living bodies of the subjects. The digestive tracts of all 4 could be seen to be working, digesting food. It quickly became apparent that what they were digesting was their own flesh that they had ripped off and eaten over the course of days. Most of the soldiers were Russian special operatives at the facility, but still many refused to return to the chamber to remove the test subjects. They continued to scream to be left in the chamber and alternately begged and demanded that the gas be turned back on, lest they fall asleep. To everyone's surprise, the test subjects put up a fierce fight in the process of being removed from the chamber. One of the Russian soldiers died from having his throat ripped out. Another was gravely injured by having his testicles ripped off and an artery in his leg severed by one of the subject's teeth. Another 5 of the soldiers lost their lives if you count the ones that committed suicide in the weeks following the incident. In the struggle, one of the 4 living subjects had his spleen ruptured and he bled out almost immediately. The medical researchers attempted to sedate him, but this proved impossible. He was injected with more than 10 times the human dose of a morphine derivative and still fought like a cornered animal, breaking the ribs and arm of one doctor. When heart was seen to beat for a full 2 minutes after he had bled out to the point there was more air in his vascular system than the blood. Even after it stopped, he continued to scream and flail for another 3 minutes, struggling to attack anyone in reach, and just repeating the word more over and over, weaker and weaker, until he finally fell silent. The surviving 3 test subjects were heavily restrained and moved to a medical facility, the 2 with intact vocal cords continuously begging for the gas, demanding to be kept awake. The most injured of the 3 was taken to the only surgical operating room that the facility had In the process of preparing the subject to have his organs placed back within his body, it was found that he was effectively immune to the sedative they had given him to prepare him for the surgery. He fought furiously against his restraints when the anaesthetic gas was brought out to put him under. He managed to tear most of the way through a 4-inch wide leather strap on one wrist, even through the weight of a 200-pound soldier holding that wrist as well. It took only a little more anaesthetic than normal to put him under, and the instant his eyelids fluttered and closed, his heart stopped. In the autopsy of the test subject that died on the operating table, it was found that his blood had tripled the normal level of oxygen. His muscles that were still attached to his skeleton were badly torn, and he had broken 9 bones in his struggle not to be subdued. Most of them were from the force his own muscles had exerted on them. The second survivor had been the first of the group of 5 to start screaming, his vocal cords destroyed. He was unable to beg or object to surgery, and he only reacted by shaking his head violently in disapproval when the anaesthetic gas was brought near him. He shook his head yes when someone suggested reluctantly they try the surgery without anaesthetic, and did not react for the entire 6-hour procedure of replacing his abdominal organs and attempting to cover them with what remained of his skin. The surgeon presiding stated repeatedly that it should be medically possible for the patient to still be alive. One terrified nurse assisting the surgery stated that she had seen the patient's mouth curl into a smile several times whenever his eyes met hers. When the surgery ended, the subject looked at the surgeon and began to wheeze out loudly, attempting to talk while struggling. Assuming this must be something of drastic importance, the surgeon had a pen and pad fetched so the patient could write his message. It was simple: keep cutting. The other 2 test subjects were given the same surgery, both without anaesthetic as well, although they had to be injected with a paralytic for the duration of the operation. The surgeon found it impossible to perform the operation while the patients laughed continuously. Once paralysed, the subjects could only follow the attending researchers with their eyes. The paralytic cleared their system in an abnormally short period of time, and they were soon trying to escape their bonds. The moment they could speak, they were again asking for the stimulant gas. The researchers tried asking why they had injured themselves, why they had ripped out their own guts, and why they wanted to be given the gas again. Only one response was given: I must remain awake. All 3 subjects' restraints were reinforced, and they were placed back into the chamber, awaiting determination as to what should be done with them. The researchers, facing the wrath of their military benefactors for having failed the stated goals of their project, considered euthanizing the surviving subjects. The commanding officer, an ex-KGB, instead saw potential and wanted to see what would happen if they were put back on the gas. The researchers strongly objected, but were overruled. In preparation for being sealed in the chamber again, the subjects were connected to an EEG monitor and had their restraints padded for long-term confinement. To everyone's surprise, all three stopped struggling the moment it was let slip that they were going back on the gas. It was obvious that at this point all three were putting up a great struggle to stay awake. One of the subjects that could speak was humming loudly and continuously. The mute subject was straining his legs against the leather bonds with all his might. First left, then right, then left again, for something to focus on. The remaining subject was holding his head off his pillow and blinking rapidly. Having been the first to be wired for EEG, most of the researchers were monitoring his brain waves. In surprise, they were normal most of the time, but sometimes flatlined inexplicably. It looked as if he were repeatedly suffering brain death before returning to normal. As they focus on paper scrolling out of the brainwave monitor, only one nurse saw his eyes slip shut at the same moment his head hit the pillow. His brainwaves immediately changed to that of deep sleep, then flatlined for the last time as his heart simultaneously stopped. The only remaining subject that could speak started screaming to be sealed in now. His brainwaves showed the same flatlines as one who had just died from falling asleep. The commander gave the order to seal the chamber with both subjects inside, as well as 3 researchers. One of the named 3 immediately drew his gun and shot the commander point blank between the eyes, then turned the gun on the mute subject and blew his brains out as well. He pointed his gun at the remaining subject, still restrained to a bed, as the remaining members of the medical and research team fled the room. "I won't be locked in here with these things. Not with you," he screamed at the man strapped to the table. "What are you?" he demanded. "I must know." The subject smiled. "Have you forgotten so easily?" the subject asked. "We are you. We are the madness that lurks within you all, begging to be free at every moment in your deepest animal mind. We are what you hide from in your beds every night. We are what you sedate into silence and paralysis when you go to the nocturnal haven where we cannot tread." The researcher paused, then aimed at the subject's heart and fired. The EEG flatlined as the subject weakly choked out, "So nearly free." Bloody Mary. She lived deep in the forest in a tiny cottage and sold herbal remedies for a living. Folks living in the town nearby called her Bloody Mary and said she was a witch. no one dared cross the old crone for fear that their cows would go dry, their food stored rot away before winter, their children take sick of fever, or any number of terrible things that an angry witch could do to her neighbours and their children. Then the little girls in the village began to disappear, one by one. No one could find out where they had gone. Grief-stricken families searched the woods, the local buildings, and all the houses and barns. But there was no sign of the missing girls. A few brave souls even went to Bloody Mary's home in the woods to see if the witch had taken the girls, but she denied any knowledge of the disappearances. Still, it was noted that her haggard appearance had changed. She looked younger, more attractive. The neighbours were suspicious, but they could find no proof that the witch had taken their young ones. Then came the night when the daughter of the miller rose from her bed and walked outside, following an enchanted sound no one else could hear. The miller's wife had a toothache and was sitting up in the kitchen, treating the tooth with a herbal remedy. When her daughter left the house, she screamed for her husband and followed the girl out of the door. The miller came running in his nightshirt. Together they tried to restrain the girl, but she kept breaking away from them and heading out of town. The desperate cries of the miller and his wife woke the neighbours. They came to assist the frantic couple. Suddenly, a sharp-eyed farmer gave a shout and pointed towards a strange light at the edge of the woods. A few townsmen followed him out into the field and saw Bloody Mary standing beside a large oak tree, holding a magic wand that was pointed towards the miller's house. She was glowing with an unearthly light as she set her evil spell upon the miller's daughter. The townsmen grabbed their guns and their pitchforks and ran towards the witch. When she heard the commotion, Bloody Mary broke off her spell and fled back into the woods. The far-sighted farmer had loaded his gun with silver bullets in case the witch ever came after his daughter. Now he took aim and shot at her. The bullet hit Bloody Mary in the hip and she fell to the ground. The angry townsmen leapt upon her and carried her back into the field, where they built a huge bonfire and burned her at the stake. As she burned, Bloody Mary screamed a curse at the villagers. If anyone mentioned her name aloud before a mirror, she would send her spirit to revenge herself upon them for her terrible death. When she was dead, the villagers went to the house in the woods and found the unmarked graves of the little girls the evil witch had murdered. She had used their blood to make her young again. From that day to this, anyone foolish enough to chant Bloody Mary's name 3 times before a darkened mirror will summon the vengeful spirit of the witch. It is said that she will tear their bodies to pieces and rip their souls from their mutilated bodies. The souls of these unfortunate ones will burn in torment as Bloody Mary once was burned, and they will forever be trapped in the mirror. the final bus of Route 375. The story happened on the bleak night of November 14th, 1995 in Beijing, China. An old man, some also say an old woman, was waiting at a bus stop at the midnight, picking up a conversation with the only other person at the stop, who was a quiet young gentleman. When the midnight bus 375, the last bus for Route 375 from the Yunminghun bus terminus, finally came, they both boarded on it. The old man took a seat near the front of the bus, while the young man sat a couple of rows behind him. There was no other passenger along with them than the driver and the decent lady ticket collector. After a while, the driver spotted two shadows by the side of the road, waving at the bus. The driver stopped, and when the doors opened, 3 people got on. There were 2 men who were supporting a third man between them, holding him up by his shoulders. The man in the middle was looking dishevelled and his head was bowed, so nobody could see his face, and there was a dismal, calm atmosphere inside the bus. Shortly after that, the old man picked up a fight with the young man under some silly pretext of stealing his wallet. The altercation escalated and the driver forced them both off the bus. When they got off the bus, zoomed away, the old man was no longer angry, and he told the young man that he had saved their lives because the 3 new passengers did not have feet and were floating. They were not living people, he said. After that, they went to the nearest police station to report this event, but nobody believed them. But the very next day, the bus company issued a statement. Last night, the final bus for Route 375 has vanished along with the driver and ticket lady. The police immediately chased down that old man and the young man, who were assumed to be mentally ill, when they tried to raise the alarm earlier, and they were both interviewed on the news. On the 3rd day, the police revealed the allegedly missing bus in the water reservoir about 100 kilometers away from its destination, Yingshangshan, or so-called Fragrant Hills. Inside the bus there were 3 very badly decomposed corpses, and the mysteries surrounding this finding included: the bus did not have enough petrol for it to keep going that far after a whole day's worth of travel. The police found that the petrol tank was filled with fresh blood instead of petrol. The corpses found were too decomposed for just 48 hours. Even if it was summer, the process of decomposition would not be this quick. An autopsy confirmed that there has been no intentional meddling with the bodies. The police went through all the security camera tapes set up for the various entrances to assess the reservoir, but have found nothing out of the ordinary. To this day, it remains an unsolved mystery.
Sands of Time by Bloody Spaghetti. Des couldn't stay in his apartment any longer. Being stuck between these same 4 walls drove him insane. He didn't care that the sandstorm might kill him. He was afraid of what he might do to himself if he had to spend another day locked up inside. The man needed a change of scenery, even if it meant walking around in the ocean of flying sand dust. The sandstorm had been plaguing this part of the world for as long as Des could remember. It had been those supermassive sandstorms, They were rare weather phenomenon, but however, one hit could destroy entire continents. The biggest danger of the sandstorm was inhaling too much dust or getting lost and buried under the sand. Des didn't have to worry about either. He was living inside the desert twister for long enough to know how it works. He shot his feet up and got dressed and covered up his face, leaving only his eyes visible. Walking out of the house, he nearly forgot his sunglasses, promoting him to return inside. Picking up them, Des gave them burnt out. By sitting at home, he wasn't stupid. He knew he couldn't walk outside. He was eyes exposed to these treacherous golden typhoon. People could leave their houses after dark when the heat of the sun did not exacerbate the terrible conditions society inside the sandstorms did not die out. On the contrary, it thrived by becoming nocturnal. Every shift from day to night, humanity adapted and carried on as usual. Of course, some people had speculated that the shift from day life to nocturnal one was made for some deliberate reasons. It could be have just the need of avoid the heat. According to those skeptics, entire societies exist from millennia in the desert, operating mainly in broad daylight. Some have come to speculate that the existence of the sandstorm monsters that lurk around during the day, hunting on unsuspicious humans who roam around in the daytime. Des never believed in monsters of any kind. He was a realist, a polygamist. However, he didn't explore the study simple not exist in his mind. He knew that the shift from day to night in human life was done in the pursuit of better living conditions at night. The temperatures dropped and the sandy wind was the only remaining inconvenience. During the night, it was easy to avoid the mummified remains of the people who died as a result of the storm. People who were unfortunate enough to inhale too much sand or died because of the heat would be often left. They were dropped. No one ever bothered to pick them up. The remains of others, it wasn't worth. Burying a loved one meant nothing. The storm could cover up the gravestones and any other non-monolithic markers. Once one was clear to all people, started burying their loved ones in their yards. But this changed little, and the living were left with a few corpses beneath the sand-covered yards. The dead were buried somewhere around here, as lying, say, were left inside the storm during the everyone. Cynical, no one seemed to mind. Des had seen his fair share of mummified corpses. He was used to seeing them as part of a whole thing. There was a part of the family business. There were undertakers. The people stopped caring about burials. The family business crumbled. Death was no longer the saddest income source of the face of the planet. After all, who needs undertakers when you've got no one to care bury in cemetery or anything like that of sorts? Des's life was a consistent flow of monstrous moments. He did not care for much. He did not love much, nor did he hate. He wasn't too preoccupied with anything. He just didn't have any friends or relatives left to care for him. He was a lone man with much of a soul too free. Only with he was kind, just of there barely exists a single grain of sand in a yet vast desert. He didn't even have too much to think about. He simply needed a change in society, a new stimulus in a vastness of just something different, even if it was different just for a few moments. That probably why he was so startled when he stepped onto a dried up corpse. He was so lost in the nothingness inside of his mind, he didn't even notice he stepped on something. The familiar yet foreign sound of bone cracking underneath his shoe caught him by surprise. He jumped back a good foot away from the mummified corpse and cursed out loud, then shouted out a glare at the sleeved corpse and then continued on his way to nowhere in particular. A dry groan caught his attention. He turned around and saw nobody, only jets of golden brown sand flying all over. He turned back and started pacing again. The ground echoed in his ears again, sending shivers down his spine. He turned around and still saw nothing but the sands dancing in the air. Suddenly the ground shifted not far from where he stood. It was suitable, almost like a mirage. He stood there for a few moments before turning back again. He thought he must have been seeing this. The storm was known to play tricks on the minds of people before. Legends circulated that it was alive and preyed on people, like some sick spirit or god that seduced them and then killed them for some sinister purpose. Once he turned, his heart sank into his heels. The mummy stood over him. It's impressively lanky. Forms seemed to spread all over. Dez's field of vision, the thing's face stretched into a feral scream. The eye's black sockets were sunk far into his skull, the missing eyes. The thing seemed like a nightmare come to life. Pitch black holes where eyes should have been, there were mostly toothless mouth, appeared like miniature black holes. They appeared to be full of rage and menace, like anger at the fact that Dez was alive. He tried to run away, but he was quickly enough. Before he could not move, the mummy grabbed him by the throat, and a burning hot sensation ran across his throat. He tried to scream, but no sound would come. He tried to break free from the monster's grip, but it was typically strong. Soon enough, he felt his feet leave the ground. No matter how much he struggled, the mummy thing would not let go of his neck. The burning sensation got worse. Each passing moment, it started spreading all over his body. The heat made its way across his skin, his flesh, his bones. His muffled screams must have amused the walking corpse as his body boiled within his frame. The man's skin dried out and stretched it over itself. Its dwindling frame, the pain in his throat felt like desert was trying to crawl into him. The sensation of burning hot sands and diamond shards in his trachea and esophagus tortured him for long minutes before he finally couldn't handle the pain anymore. Des felt himself fade as everything turned black. The heat persisted, however. It wouldn't go away. With persistence, the burning, itching, cutting, blasting pain that was centered in his throat, Des opened his eyes, screamed as hard as he could, a loud, expressive roar filled with rage and anguish that he was trying to let out. At least what came out was a hoarse, shrill, panic cry. The sweet, sweet, metallic taste of hemoglobin and rich blood taste his taste buds, but that's all it was, a taste. A painful, familiar scene greeted his eyes. His mind returned into the reality in which he was a ravenous ghoul, a monster beast who sunk his bony claws into the shoulders of the woman whose throat he just tore open. His teeth, the thirst was too much again. He needed to quench it. Her blood was meant to be enough, but he wasn't quick enough to drink it. She was already drying up. The instant he touched her, it was over. Cheeks of very red hair and fallen out of her dried up scalp. He touched every dry organ tissue unit came into contact with into literal sand. The man's touch was evaporating the liquid inside them, inside all of them. The red head was about to turn into a pile of dust. The ghoul hopes for a meal being washed away in the sands of time. The passage of time was the ghoul's worst enemy. Even the hunger wasn't as bad as the passage of time, for time had remained him every now and then. There was no hope for a thing like him. The woman sucked dry by a cursed rustic dermis. She wasn't any different from the substance now moving into the beast's arteries. The ghoul fell to his knees, crying out like a dying animal whose throat had been crushed, was condemned to roam the earth until the end of times, forever thirsty, forever unable to quench his thirst. For those who committed the crime of spilling the blood, of consuming the flesh of those who offered hospitality within the realm of the desert, there is no mercy. It is only fitting that the punishment for such a crime is fate far worse than death.
I won. Posted by MTP6921. I knew this day was going to come. As much as I tried to hide from my past, it eventually. I knew this day was going to come. As much as I tried to hide from my past, eventually I knew they would find me. Technology had just advanced too much, and a mere Google search on anybody could tell you their present location. I was given the ultimatum to meet in the field about a quarter mile from my house, or they will knock on my door. I couldn't have them come to my house because I have a 10-year-old daughter and I'm married. So I put my sneakers on and then left the house. I could get to the field by taking a public trail, so that's the route that I took. My assumption that time, heals old wounds, wasn't true in this case. In college I messed around with a girl who I knew had a serious boyfriend who went to a different college. I got her pregnant and she had to have an abortion. Eventually she told her boyfriend and her father, and I had to cut all ties with that university, which was much easier to do in the 1990s. I make my way onto the trail and it's a hot day, probably about 75 degrees Fahrenheit. I have no weapons and I have no idea what will await me once I get to the field. As I'm walking, I could feel the adrenaline run throughout my body. I have conformed to all of the society's norms for the past 20 years. I put a button-down shirt on, khaki pants with leather shoes that need to be polished, but I've conformed in a manner that keeps society going for the betterment of my daughter and everybody else's daughters. Now I have to reach down into myself and pull out that person that I once was. That person didn't care if Julie had a boyfriend. The person who didn't care if I get my teeth knocked out by taking an elbow while playing basketball, or the person who could get punched in the face with a fisted glove just to wear his opponent down for no other reason other than to say that I won. I could feel this person start to come back out of me as I got closer to the field. If these son of a bitches want this person, then this is what they're going to get. They're expecting some washed up loser who will succumb to their brutality, but I'll meet them head on. I see the field and I see one of them. They did me a favour and treated this as a gentlemanly like fight. I kind of see or hear no other than this person in front of me. He is a man in his early 30s and like me, he has no weapons. I pick up my gait and he puts himself into a fighting stance. I am nothing more than rage, as I'm no more than 20 yards away from him. But he doesn't know that I have the best weapon. As I get within striking distance, he throws a punch at me, and I counter punch at him. He hits me, and I don't feel it, and he flies back to the point where he falls to the ground. He gets back up, and I hit him again, and I yell at him, "You fucking piece of shit. Don't ever fucking touch me again." I am still that person that knows nothing more than rage. I see my next opponent, who is about 30 yards away. Part of me is focused on the task at hand, and part of me is complimentary in how these blokes didn't bring any weapons, and how they spread themselves out to make it a fair fight. I knew I had to maintain my discipline. Without discipline, England wouldn't have ruled the world. I have nothing more than fire in my eyes. I conjure up thoughts of Davy Crockett at the Alamo, and how I can't retreat. If I don't end this today, they will probably harm my darling daughter Grace. This has to end today. I am now just feet away from my opponent. He doesn't have it. I can see in his eyes. He doesn't want to be here anymore. He's a tall guy, probably about 6 feet and well over 200 pounds. But he just doesn't have it. Nobody has, or had, what I have. They might make more money than I do, or lift more weights than me, but they just don't have it. That ability to rip through anything at any cost. The ability to say, I don't give a fuck if you punch me in the face, because I'm not going to feel it, and you're going to feel my punch. I am now within striking distance. He too puts himself in a fighting stance, like the last bloke. I just continue moving forward as aggressively as possible to make him feel weak and inferior. He's expecting me to throw a punch, but instead I open my hand and grab his entire face, and in one forceful and violent motion I throw him to the ground with my hand on his face. His back, then his head hits the grass, then he lets off a loud squeal, like he just got the wind knocked out of him. He was done. So I moved on to the last opponent. He was a guy about my age. I remembered his appearance. He was the one why we're all here today. He is the old boyfriend, who is now the husband. He too is no more than 30 yards away. I need to end this once and for all. I know, no matter what I do, or where I go, he won't stop until he gets his revenge. As I get closer and closer to him, a sense of accountability takes over me. I did something wrong and I knew it. I knew she had a boyfriend, and I wanted nothing more than sex from her. I could make every excuse, but I was wrong, and I needed to make this end today. He's not a fighter. That's why he's number 3. He's like an accountant or something. I got right up to him and I said, punch me. I could see the reluctance in his face, so I said, go ahead, fucking punch me. I could still see the reluctance in his eyes, so I lowered my voice and said, fucking punch me. He squared away and hit me below my right eye. I didn't feel it, so I said again, where he punched me. Then I said, punch me again. Then I said, go ahead, punch me again. Then I said again, where this must have happened at least 15 times, where he sprained his wrist on my face. His 2 comrades were by his side watching in on this horror show. I knew my face was mangled, though he wasn't a fighter. He was still a 40-something-year-old man. I could tell he had enough, so I said, are we good now? He paused for a second and said, yeah, we're straight now. I said, I am sorry for what I did, and tell your wife and her parents that I am sorry. We all hugged, and I walked back home. All I could think was, God, I love that so much, and more importantly, I won. Sometimes people just grow like mould. Posted by MTP6921. Today I woke up and did my usual Wednesday routine to get ready for work. I'm never excited about my morning routine, and I kind of just walk through the motions. I'm not in the mood of listening to music, so I put on classic Howard Stern on as I drive the half hour to my office. I walk through my workplace doors, and with my usual little joy I greet nobody as I make my way to my cubicle. I turn on my laptop and notice Tuesday with yesterday's date showing up. I have the newest version of Windows installed on my laptop, so there shouldn't be an issue. I am sandwiched between a 50-year-old male named Gary and a 63 named Annette. I'm a 20-something-year-old female who is not in a relationship and has no kids. I work for the government in the Department of Transportation. Some of my job duties entail me going out into the field and investigating road and bridge complaints. So I knew today was Wednesday because I had gone out and inspected the Bear Creek Bridge yesterday. Gary kind of creeps me out, so I was reluctant to ask him anything, and Annette had about 3 different personality disorders that only a government worker could possess and still hold a job. So, I reluctantly said, "Hey Gar, today is Wednesday, right?" Gary, who lacked any kind of humbleness, replied, "If yesterday was Monday, then yes, today would be Wednesday." It was obvious that Gary was trying to joke, but he was serious that yesterday was Monday, but it was impossible because on Monday I came to the office and Tuesday I went out to inspect the bridge. I was really going to put myself in the stupid zone, so I doubled down and asked Annette the same question. I said, "Annette, today is Wednesday, right?" She responded, "No, stupid, today is Tuesday." Typically, in a normal work environment, I would go complain or tell her not to speak to me that way, but both were futile, so I just sat at my desk and pondered why I am stuck on the dates being off. It's because I know I'm right. It would be one thing if I confused Thursday with Friday, because they're later in the week, but it's pretty easy to remember that I had my typical regrettable weekend, then dragged myself into my cubicle on Monday and did nonsensical paperwork to prepare for the bridge inspection the next day on Tuesday. So on Tuesday I did the same routine and went out to the bridge and put on my green reflective vest and pretended that I knew what I was inspecting, as I usually do. So I thought to myself, what do I do today? If I already worked Tuesday already, there are some things in life that I'm willing to drop, like Annette calling me stupid. But I'm not working at this damned job another day than necessary. Unfortunately, there is no one else around for me to ask their opinion on what day of the week it is today. So I threw myself in the lion's den and I said, "Hey Gar, did you see me here yesterday in the office?" Gary waited a few moments, like something didn't calculate correctly in his brain, and he responded, "No, I don't recall seeing you yesterday." So then, while I remained at my cubicle, I reluctantly asked Annette the same question. I said, "Annette, did you see me here in my cubicle yesterday?" Annette responded, "What kind of dumb question is that? You handed me the paperwork on the Freeland Highway." After hearing that response, I had chills go down my spine, because I now know that one of them had seen me in the office while the other had not. So I asked Annette, "Do you remember what I was wearing when you saw me yesterday in the office?" She replied, "You kind of were wearing an all-black dress that went down to your knees. You looked like a slut, if you ask me." I thought to myself, that's about as opposite from me as I can get, as I'm wearing jeans and a hooded sweatshirt. I'm wondering if that person was even me. Sure, I own a couple of black dresses that I would wear a couple of times a year, but why to the office? I replied in a non-sarcastic tone, "Oh, thanks for the compliment. Hey, are you sure that woman was me?" Annette responded, "Well, she looked like you, and she talked like you, and she was lazy like you, so yeah, it was you." I responded, "Oh, thanks for clarifying." As I sit in my cubicle, I'm completely perplexed at why one of my co-workers saw me in the office yesterday and the other one didn't, while I know for sure I wasn't in the office and I was out inspecting a bridge. I know today is Wednesday and they both think it's Tuesday. I continue to ponder at my desk and wonder, does this happen often and I just never pick up on it? Everything about my life is so miserable that perhaps this is just a regular occurrence where a day mysteriously gets added or deleted. I said, "Hey Annette, how many more years do you have to work until you can retire?" She responded, "You hear this pill bottle I'm shaking? I take these pills so I don't have to think about that. Every day is just as horrible as the previous day, so I just zone myself out." I then say, "Gar, how about you? Are you close to retiring?" He laughed and said, "When my wife made me move out, I accumulated so much credit card debt that I'll never get out of here. Plus, I have to pay for my kids that haven't wanted to see me for the past 7 years." I think to myself, dealing with the public's constant complaints on potholes and everything else on top of being stuck in between the two most miserable people on earth. I wonder why I'm losing my grip on reality. Then I further think and I draw a complete blank about myself. I have no idea where I grew up or who my parents are. Then it dawned on me, I know absolutely nothing about myself other than this job. I mean nothing. I have no friends, no cousins, nothing. I then say, "Hey Annette, how long have I worked here for?" She pauses for a minute and says, "You know, I don't know if you started working here before or after me." I responded, "Well, how old do you think I am?" She responded, "Well, besides yesterday, you usually look like a miserable lesbian or something, maybe between 25 or 50 or something. Do you still get your period?" I typically don't respond to her rude remarks, so I brushed over her period remark. But she thought the same thing that I thought, where I didn't have a concept of my own age. I kind of was like the Mona Lisa, which I'm not sure is a compliment or not. I have no photos on my cubicle of anyone, no significant others. Out of desperation, I say, "How old do you think I am, Gary?" He responded, "I kind of tuned you out when I got the sense you were revolted by me. You've always been here, kind of like a fungus." As I looked around the office, all I see is outdated postings from the 1980s that no one has given a damn to take down. I think about my one-room efficiency apartment where I have no personal effects and not even a television. I get these what-if thoughts, that what if I'm not even a human? What if I'm some type of festering mould that grew out of this disgusting environment where I'm just a number, and the less I complain, the more my superiors ignore me. I have zero memories of anything. I derive pleasure from nothing, though even for me this place has been making me wonder about things. I enjoy eating soggy cereal with little to no milk. I have a hatred for the sun, and I only bathe when I can tell people can smell me. I have never bled, so I had never had a use for a band-aid. Gary chimed in on my thoughts and said, "My first memories of you were that you gave a weird whole new definition. I'm not sure if you even knew how to talk. The dot, and especially I was just happy to have someone that resembled a woman in this male-dominated field. Rather than pursue this rabbit hole any further today, I just went with the majority rule, that today was Tuesday. I'm sure I'll ponder the same things tomorrow anyways. How I Survived a House Invasion, posted by Snoo Pickles 1731. This story happened more than 10 years ago, when I was still a student. It has a few graphic details of animal harm and graphic violence, so discretion is advised. A bit of backstory. As with most students, I was always broke, and I had a few ventures apart from my part-time job to bring me extra money. One of them was house and pet sitting. I have always had a love for animals, so when this couple contacted me to ask me to house sit for them for the last few days before they returned from their overseas trip, as the last sitter has bailed on them and their 6-month-old golden retriever puppy would be alone, I jumped at the opportunity. The fact that they promised to pay me the full 2-week fee for staying there less than a week made it just more appealing. Little did I know how bad it would turn out. I got the details, got the keys from the agent, and headed over to the house, as it was already after 5 p.m. and almost dark. As it was early spring, I got to the house, which was a really nice place, but it was bordered a not so good area that was and still is prone to crime, house break-ins, robberies, etc. It did not bother me much, 'cause nothing will happen to me. I know, young and naive. The first 4 nights went without a hitch. Watching movies, jacuzzi, and just generally enjoying myself. The owners would have returned on the 5th day, fairly late at night. I went over to check on the doggo. I got a call from them about 10 p.m. saying their flight got delayed. They are going to stay in a hotel and do the 3.5-hour drive back the following morning, and asked if I could sleep there again that night, which was fine. I was already there and had my overnight bag still in my car. I called my dad to let him know of the plans, as I was still staying with my parents, and he specifically asked what the address was. I normally did not give them details like that, because I was old enough to look after myself. I still believe to this day that probably saved my life. I eventually got to the bed about 1 a.m. and it felt like I have only slept for 5 minutes when I was awoken to a window breaking, and I could hear movement and what sounded like footsteps running down the hallway. The first thing I did was grab my phone and just hit redial. Thanks to my old Motorola phone, redialing was as simple as pressing one button, as my dad was the last number that I had called, hoping that he wakes up from the call. I then dropped the phone in between the headboard and the mattress, in case my dad picks up that he can hear what's going on. I had barely done that when the first guy stormed through the bedroom door. I could see his silhouette, and he had a knife in his hand. When he saw me, he raised it and came at me. Now, one thing to those that is unfamiliar with South Africa and the crime is that the robberies and house invasions usually are very brutal and violent. People get murdered and tortured if they in the slightest retaliate or not cooperate with the robbers. Out of instinct, I raised my legs back when he came at me, and when he came within reach, I kicked both legs out as hard as I can. Now, I'm not a small guy. I'm 6'3", and at that stage I weighed about 100 kilos or 220 pounds, and I was fit and strong. My time not spent at the uni or work was at the gym. I could do an easy 250-pound bench, 350-pound squat. When I kicked and made contact with the guy, he completely lifted off the ground and shot into the wall. Luckily, the knife shot out of his hand as well. Before he got the chance to get up, I was on top of him, driving my right knee into his face, and in return, his head into the wall. I knew that my life depended on it, so I put in some extra force. The guy dropped like a sack of potatoes, but before I could get up, I heard the sound of a pistol cock, and I froze. It felt like all the blood drained from my body, and I became just numb. I remember the only thing that went through my head was that if he shot me, that I'd rather die than be a disabled or dependent on another person that will have to take care of me. He stood that way with the pistol against my head for what felt like hours, but was probably less than 10 seconds. I did not move, and he eventually said in a very broken English to get on the bed face down. I panicked, but thought if he wanted to shoot me, that he already would have done so. So I did as he said. He threw a blanket over me, and I turned into a fetal position with my back against the wall, just so if they wanted to stab me, that I had my legs and arms in front to protect my body. Now by that time I had forgotten that I had called my dad, and the guy that I had need is still down. I heard a third guy come into the room, and I could hear what sounded like Portuguese to me. I could not understand what they said, but I recognised it, as we used to go to Mozambique on the holiday a lot, and that is the main language spoken there. The one guy tried to get the guy that I put down off the ground, while the other started to ransack the house, shoving valuables into a big bag. It was about at this time that I heard tyres screeching and a car approaching at what sounded like Mark 1. The car skidded to a halt in front of the gate, and I heard someone scream. It was my dad. The three inside the house panicked and ran out of the back door and tried to jump the fence. My dad opened fire, shooting in their general direction. Now I know my dad missed them on purpose, because if he wanted to hit them, he would, as he is not one of the best shot that I know, and I'm not just saying that because he's my dad. He is ex-army special forces, or recess for those in the know. Represented South Africa in the clay pigeon world championships a couple of years ago. Has various regional pistol and rifle championship titles, and is a gunsmith by occupation. I have seen him hit golf balls at 50 meters with a pistol. Politics and the racial situation in the country would have had him in big trouble had he hit one of them. I grabbed the house keys and pressed the gate remote, and my dad called the police while he came in. I met him at the front door, and he walked out to the car to wait there for the police. It took them over an hour to get there. Some excuse of no vehicle available. By that time I had calmed down and started to look for the dog. I could not find her anywhere. I grabbed a flashlight from my dad and started scanning the surrounding yard, and as I got to the corner I could see her laying on the ground. I got to her and saw she was dead. Later autopsies revealed she was poisoned, and the police found pieces of meat laced with poison near the fence. Poisoning is pretty standard practice in my country for dealing with dogs at a house or area that is targeted for a break-in or robbery. I was fuming and so sad. The police was also pretty useless, and had a don't give a shit attitude, and barely took our statements. By that time it was starting to get light, and I retrieved my bag, phone, and locked the house as good as I can without touching anything, and drove home behind my dad. Only when I got home, I got the story from my dad's side. He said he answered my call only to hear the shouting and what sounded like fighting going on, and when I did not respond, he flew out of the house and raced over. Luckily, he asked me for the address the previous night, and he knows the area well to know exactly which house it is. Now, my dad got there pretty quickly, and he said he stayed on the line the whole time, only hanging up when he stopped at the gate. My parents' house is about 10 kilometers or 6 miles from there. Through a residential area, it's normally about a 20-minute drive. The call duration was 7 minutes and 13 seconds. I met the detectives there later that day, gave my statement, they took fingerprints, etc. And the owners got back about the same time. The rest of the day was a blur, as I came down from the shock and adrenaline. Now, that is not where the story ends. About 7 or 8 months later, I got a call from the detective telling me they caught the guys and I must come to a lineup to point them out. I specifically told her that I did not see any of their faces as it was dark, and after the guy held the gun against my head, I was under the blanket and did not see anything. She reassured me that they caught them on fingerprints and will show them to me beforehand, which might not be the ethically correct way to do it, but they wanted to have as much evidence as possible against them. You will understand why in a minute. I got to the police station, and unlike you see in the movies, there is no one-way glass to separate, or a separate room. They bring the 3 guys into the room and make them stand against the wall. The one which I was later told was the leader, which was the one that I had need, looked at me with so much hate as I had never seen in my life. He had the eyes of someone that would slit your throat and not blink an eye. His name was Joseph Dragon Sambo. He pulled his hand up to his neck and made the slit my throat gesture. You know which one I mean. We left the room, and the detective gave me a copy of his rap sheet. Amongst others, 4 counts of murder, I think 8 or 9 for attempted murder, multiple assault, aggravated assault, over 100 house break-ins, robbery and rape. I was shocked. The detective told me that had I not taken him out first and fast that night, I would have definitely not gotten away so lightly. Now this is also not where the story ends. 3 days later I get another call from the detective saying that I should be careful as he had escaped from them and they have not caught him yet. I was not worried too much as the robbery wasn't at my house and I had changed cars, so he probably could not find me. Also, I got my firearm license and carried my pistol on me 24/7. I did not hear anything after that, until about 2 years later when I saw the detective in the grocery shop. We started talking about the case, and she told me that he was killed during a home invasion. He broke into the wrong house, and the owner was waiting for him, pistol in hand. Shot him 1 in the stomach and 1 in the neck, and thanks to the slow response time of emergency services and police, he bled out on the guy's living room floor, ridding society of a piece of human garbage. I want to add a bit of info to this. All 3 that were caught were Mozambican nationals, undocumented and no fingerprints or ID in the system, essentially illegal immigrants. and it is of opinion in South Africa that more than 70% of all violent crimes is done by illegal immigrants, mainly Mozambican, Zimbabwean and Nigerian descent. It makes it fairly easy, because none of these countries have extradition to South Africa, so if it gets too hot, they just flee back over the border and nothing can be done to them. The whole ordeal has made me more vigilant, heightened by my situational awareness, and made me a little paranoid, to double and triple check all doors, locks, etc. Also, thanks to my heightened situational awareness, has allowed me to remove myself from a few potential dangerous situations in the years after the incident. But it has also robbed me of my peace of mind. I have since immigrated to a safer country, but I still sometimes wake up at night if I hear a noise. So to keep up with tradition, Joseph, we will never meet again, as you have passed, but to his cronies or anyone that wants to try something similar, please do pay me a visit. I will arrange your swiftly departure and reunion with Joseph in hell. And to Joseph, I hope you died in agony for poisoning Daisy. Running with a Cult, posted by TARDIS Tree. Whenever I have been around people in my work industry, we always hear of the horror stories of crazy cults, people getting paid for weird requests and such, but I've never thought with my luck I'd have to worry about being in one of these stories. Man, was I wrong. This is probably going to be a mini-series since it's a bit long. For some background, I am a very much introverted person. I don't go out much. If it's outside of my small group of friends. I started doing OnlyFans around this time where it was very popular in quarantine. I had already been on FetLife, which is a fetish-based network like Facebook, but for the kink community. So I was thinking doing OnlyFans wouldn't be too hard, considering I was already involved in the kink community because of my work at the adult store and my time on FetLife. Usually with friend requests, I don't normally accept them if I don't know the person in real life, due to past events of issues online. My red flag radar was fairly used to sensing something was off if I was in danger. However, this time it was a silent danger I wasn't prepared for. I had begun posting regular content on my account and was told to make a Twitter for a following fan base for my work, which made sense at the time. I was fairly new to the idea of it. I was logged into my Fet to check my messages for the day, and a new friend request popped up with a message. Thank you, TARDIS Trey, for taking the time to read my message. I'm Wolfie. I am excited to help you with your OnlyFans because I see you have potential and I can help. Please feel free to message if interested in working together, Wolfie. I wasn't sure why the message came off so proper with the tagline of something to the effect of "Join us." It's been a few months, so my memory is a bit fuzzy to all the exact message details because I mainly wanted to block out as much as I could. I started looking at the profile to see if I would find any reasons not to add them to my account because I was fairly new to having people I didn't know as friends. I saw he was in a pack with several women in all the different age groups and that we all had an OnlyFans and modelling in common, which wasn't something that was alarming to me. I added him back and shortly after that began the introduction into the cult. I slowly started getting more messages in my inbox about how they could help me because I was now one of the pack. I didn't think it meant anything more than being friendly. Something in the back of my mind was telling me to be careful. But stupid is as stupid does, and I paid it no mind. I wish I had now in retrospect. When I was at work, Wolfie would blow up my inbox with messages saying he added me to a group on Twitter that was special because it had all of our pages in it, and we had to do a chain of if one girl posted about her OF, we had to share it and keep the pack happy, which seemed harmless. That became an every hour a new post was made and we had to share and do the same in return for hours. I thought this was normal for Twitter because I hardly ever use it. I was put in two chats, the main chat and the one with just Wolfie and his wife, because she wanted to see if I was a good match for their pack. He would often send me photos of them in bed and say things like, "One day you will be in the middle of us, where you belong." Mind you, I am in a relationship with my partner of 8 years at this point, so I wasn't sure if he was just kidding or not. He would send me messages of him telling me how to post my pages, my photos, and any time I had updated my FetLife with new modelling photos. He was the first to comment, "This is my cub. Appreciate her or I'll end you." Things of that nature. I get the whole being an alpha, but it was just getting creepy to me that just seconds after my post went live, it was already getting attention. To my knowledge, there isn't a way to get notifications of someone's posts on that specific site, like Twitter, unless he had my page open, waiting. I started to feel more strange vibes when he started sending me messages via his wife and her telling me someday we were all going to get a place in the middle of nowhere. No one would find us and we'd all do sex work together and live together in this wolf alpha based lifestyle, which sounds like a cult now that I'm actually writing this. There were 4 other girls that were all doing the same thing, listening and doing everything their alpha said. A few days went by and Wolfie started really making me feel incredibly uncomfortable with anything that this was. He did a posted writing of his own on his page and made sure to tell me in the group that I was his favourite new little cub, and this was for my own good. The writing was about how he loved me and told me to be in his outfit and wait in my room for him. He snuck into my apartment and attacked my partner, beat him close to death and brought him up to my room. He wrote I had to choose who I loved more. He wrote I chose him over my partner, and that he then dominated me and killed my partner, and I was stolen away to live with him and his pack forever. My stomach had dropped out of my body as I reread the story he had created. The details of my apartment he couldn't possibly know. The things about my home nobody knew unless they were in my home scared me. I was on edge for days because I didn't have a clue how he knew these details. My skin was crawling. I told him I didn't know how I felt of the story he fantasized about me in his world. I knew this was it. It was the reason I had to run. I had to take a break to finish the end of this story because of how creepy it is for me to have to write and relive everything because it's terrifying. Wolfie kept showing the rest of his pack the story and had me under his list of relationships on his submissive and in a poly relationship with him and his wife. My skin for days was crawling with the fear of me not knowing how he knew all those things he knew, not knowing how he knew all the things he knew. I never posted about my home. He saw a post of me in a bad mood from a disagreement, but that wasn't cause for him to write a fantasized life of murder and rape and such, was it? The rest of that week I wore oversized clothes and cried on and off because I was terrified to be alone in my apartment. I showed my partner and friend, and they both agreed that this was not something I would be able to handle on my own. I took myself out of the groups on Twitter for a start and tried not to draw attention to Wolfie when the girls started messaging me out of the blue saying they didn't understand why I wanted to be brainwashed by my partner and they loved me and everything would be fine if I went with them. I deleted my Twitter and also my OnlyFans because I didn't know what they could find on me. I blocked them all on my new accounts, and I also took down my profile on FetLife and made a new one with a completely different name and credentials so they couldn't find me. I even changed my number because Wolfie found out what it was to try and get me to talk to him and explain why I was pulling away. I made new accounts and made sure everyone was aware that needed to know about this potential stalker so I could maintain my sanity. I thought it was over, then a week had passed and I didn't see any new messages on my new profile on FetLife or my messages. Man, was I wrong. My best friend had checked her messages on Instagram, where of course he found me via her. He asked if she knew where I was and if I was okay, because I disappeared out of nowhere. I thought I had escaped the nightmare. I went to my Instagram. I had made and had a few different messages from him about him coming to get me, to rescue me and save me. I was terrified. How far would this guy go for me? Why couldn't he just leave me alone? I blocked him again, and countless times of changing my names and such. I had finally reached a point of just getting into the habit of bringing my knife to work in my boots and locking my deadbolt when I was alone, because I didn't want to be afraid anymore. This was almost a month of me being terrified out of my mind. I made one last post on my FetLife about him, so all my following could see I was in real danger, and I was done being afraid, and openly said if they were wanting to come for me, I'd be ready with law enforcement and such. Thankfully, after that post was made public, I went to check his profile to see if it was still up, and it was gone. It's been a few months since this has happened, and thank God I haven't had any weird messages or my friends getting anything weird from this whole thing. I wish I would have listened to my intuition about this in the first place. Maybe then it could have been avoided. Thankfully, I am safe from this insane wolf pack cult. Glass Eye, posted by Bloody Spaghetti. I fucking hate children. Call me what you will, think whatever you want, but children are the worst kind of people. They're loud, irritating, disgusting, little sacks of snot and tears. Occasionally, they also reek of biological waste, not to mention they're completely incapable of handling themselves, for the most part, that is. Some children are fairly adult-like, however rare that might be. Sadly, that's the type of kid is the one you'd never want to meet. As nice as that kind of kid sounds, they're probably the worst breed. I doubt anyone enjoys seeing a kid who was forced to grow up way too fast because of abuse, loss, or any other unpleasant experience. My hatred of children is mostly limited to the really young ones. They're just so vile. I must have been 12 or 13 when that happened. I wasn't a very social kid myself and preferred to keep to myself. Back then, I lived in a small town, bushes on all sides surrounding my house, with a small opening leading to a long and winding road. That road led to out of our small town. The traffic was fairly scarce on that road, so you could travel on it safely by foot. My dad made a swing he had hung up from the tree next to our house. I spent my afternoon swinging on that swing most days, daydreaming. That day I must have been caught up in my fantasies because I didn't notice the battered kid that smelled like used diapers approaching. His sobbing only became audible when he was already standing right next to the swing. The smell hit me right after. I heard his pained cries and turned to look at him. His blood-stained, pale little face and tattered clothes made him look like a zombified thing. I nearly fell off the swing when I noticed just how bad he looked. My first reaction was to curse, and then I became worried about the kid. He was visibly younger than me. He might have been 6 or 7. Looked like he hadn't eaten in a few weeks and was run over by a truck. I remember trying to gauge out what had happened to him, but to no avail. He only stood there, sobbed and shook. After a few frustrating minutes, I figured out what had happened. He and his father were involved in an accident down the road. The car flipped over. His father was trapped and asleep, as he put it. I figured his father must have been hurt, so I wanted to get help. To do that, I asked him to show me where it had happened, and he led me down the road. After about 15 minutes of walking in awkward silence with a kid that looked like a zombie who shit himself, we finally reached our destination. A lone car stood on its side at the side of the road. I told the kid to stay there and promised to get back with help. I ran back to town and alerted the first adult I could find, my school guard, Mr. Barsanian, a middle-aged man whose first name I never learned. He might have been past his prime, but he was built like a tank. I figured he'd help me. We ran back to the place I had left the kid. Much to my surprise, the kid lay on the ground motionless. Back then I had no idea a person could die from injuries in a matter of minutes if they're left untreated. I was panicking. I didn't want the kid or his father to die. I started crying, pleading with Mr. Barsanian to help them both, and he told me that he'll do whatever he can. He told me to stay put and went to check on the kid. Placing his fingers on the kid's neck, the child sprang back to life, spat something red into Mr. Barsanian's face, causing the middle-aged school guard to stumble back and wipe his face vigorously. Before I could do anything, a pale, lanky, tattooed figure rose from behind the car. It was a tall man. He had the vilest face I had ever seen. Yellow teeth shone from behind his devious smile. His sunken eyes were yellowish in shade as well. Mr. Barsanian stumbled around blindly, shouting profanities. The lanky man pulled out a weapon of some kind and smashed it against Mr. Barsanian's leg, causing the middle-aged man yelled out in pain as he fell down. The lanky man stood over him, casting a predatory shadow. He was swaying from side to side. He could barely maintain his balance on his feet. I screamed in terror as the lanky man grinned from ear to ear. His smile was almost inhuman. Mr. Barsanian saw me and yelled at me to run. I ran. I hadn't got far before I lost my footing. I ended up landing on my head and cutting my scalp. A pulsating pain radiated across my head as I tried getting back up. Looking behind me one last time, I saw that kid getting back up to his feet, clutching something in his hand. He looked at me and waved his hand. I barely made it home. My clothes were covered in my blood, and I couldn't bring myself to say a word. I didn't speak for months. I was too scared to speak. The visual of that kid standing up, waving at me, coupled with the agonized screaming of Mr. Barsanian, haunted me. It's still a very painful memory, like a terrible nightmare that extended into my consciousness after I've woken up. My parents were sure it was the blow to the head, and my dad took off the swing, assuming I had busted my scalp falling from the swing. I must have left blood marks all over that thing. They found Mr. Barsanian's remains dumped at the side of the road the next day when he failed to show up for work. His body was broken and bloodied. I didn't tell anyone anything about the incident. The man and the kid were never found. I couldn't look at my brother the same after that day. He reminded me of that little fucker who used me as bait. I hate kids to this day because that little shit scared me more than his old man. Who wouldn't be scarred by the sight of an evil little kid with a visible empty eye socket? I was so freaked out by that little fucker waving his eye at me. I had no clue glass eyes were a thing back then. Abandoned in the operating room. Posted by MTP6921. As a little girl, the only thing I ever wanted to be was a trauma surgeon. My dad would watch the television show MASH pretty much 24/7, which kind of grew on me. I loved watching the excitement and suspense of knowing that I could save someone's life. When I finished my premed program at the University of Pennsylvania, I was overjoyed when Penn accepted me into their med school program. Being in med school was grueling because it really was the survival of the fittest. Nobody cared if I was exhausted from studying 20 hours straight. Then I had to shadow some hardened physician who thought I was nothing more but in their way. I'm a non-aggressive female who is very non-confrontational. I would rather calmly talk my way out of something than get into a yelling match. So I struggled in my medical school in dealing with high-strung male physicians. I never understood the reason for their hostility. Perhaps they really didn't like being doctors themselves, or because they thought new emerging students like myself were a threat to them. I didn't know the reason for their hostility towards me, but it didn't matter because I couldn't fight back, and they would fail me if I did. Medical school had taken at least 10 years of my life, but I finished the program. I managed to drag myself across the finish line. This is something that I wanted since I was 5 years old, and now I sign my name, Sarah Balmer, MD. My dad was so proud of me. We both cried and hugged each other during my graduation ceremony. I was grateful towards him. From all the times a washed-up old doctor would yell and scream at me, and my dad always encouraged me to not drop out. I chose to be a surgical intern. The hostility had really increased at this point. I was now doing actual surgeries and not watching. I tried my best to tune out a surgeon throwing something at the wall in anger or watching a nurse being belittled. It seemed like the younger surgeons didn't have these behaviours, but the older ones had adopted it as part of their personalities. The day after day onslaught of hostility was starting to take its toll on me. I had made it a point to jog as much as possible. I couldn't drink alcohol because I always needed to be on my toes. As a first-year intern, I always had to prove myself to be able to continue on as a resident physician. Any insults I received from my senior male counterparts, I just acknowledged it and I didn't argue back. I was too exhausted to even cry at night when I got home. When my head would hit the pillow, my brain would just spin out of control with all the second guessing from the surgeries I performed earlier in the day. I managed to get through my internship, and now I am a resident. As much as I despised the aggressive male doctors continually belittling me, at times I knew I needed them to step in when my patients went south. However, now as a resident, there was no more crying for help. If someone died on the operating table, it would be because of me. The buck stopped with me. I wanted to be a trauma surgeon, and my wish had finally become true. A gunshot wound, then a ruptured aorta, then a motorcycle accident victim. The cases never stopped, and I had to be on my toes for each one. Every surgery I was the picture with 2 outs and a full count. One wrong move and I would blow the World Series, or in this case, cause someone to die. I finished my residency program and was offered a position at St. Joseph's Hospital, which was in the heart of urban Philadelphia. I would work my shifts Monday through Friday and would be on call on weekends. The hospital was not doing well financially, and the seasoned surgeons were starting to quit. They weren't happy with their reimbursements based on the amount of surgeries they were performing. I dreaded going to the medical staff meetings with the rest of the surgeons because the males would just yell and scream at the hospital administrators. To make things worse, if I didn't take the surgeon's side, then I was looked at as a scab. I did have a huge amount of loans, but I wasn't interested or concerned about making money. I never wanted the newest car or the nicest house, and my mentality didn't change when I became a surgeon. I just didn't care about those things. I knew most surgeons had put a dollar amount on each patient that came into the operating room, but I never had that mentality. My satisfaction came from saving people's lives and not the money. The monthly meetings had turned into weekly meetings. The hospital was in dire straits financially, and the other surgeons were close to walking out. The meetings turned into yelling matches, where the male surgeons would come close to fighting the hospital administrators. I remember the last meeting we had on February 28th, 2020, when I knew things had reached the boiling point. The administrators had mentally checked out. Bankruptcy was looming, and they just tuned out the surgeons. Every surgeon had handed in their pages that day. They had all decided to quit. After weeks of threatening to quit, this day they had finally done so. I was stunned. My shift was starting in 5 minutes. I was assured by the head administrator that surgeons from different hospitals would come relieve me. I was scheduled from 1 PM to 11 PM. It was a typical day of car accidents and emergency heart surgeries. As 11 PM got close, I got the sinking feeling that no one was going to come to relieve me from the operating room. Unfortunately, I was right. It was 11:30 PM and there was no end in sight. I worked through the early morning. I would take a nap whenever I could in between the trauma arrivals. I would call the administrator, and he continuously told me he was working on getting a surgeon to relieve me. Then things went from bad to unbearable. The hospital was in panic mode from the emergence of COVID-19. Though I was stuck in the operating room by myself for 2 whole days now, all of the attention in the hospital was focused on the really sick patients arriving in the emergency room. We didn't know much about this virus, and we were all given N95 masks to help filter the air. I was coming up to my 4th day now with no relief in sight. Every time I would think that maybe I could go home, a trauma victim would present to the emergency room. I was just beyond exhaustion, and now I can't breathe through this mask. I had to give each patient my utmost care and attention. It's like going through a McDonald's drive-through where nobody cares if so and so called out. The people just want their food to be fast and done right, and it was the same thing with me. The critical patient's family members didn't want to hear that I couldn't perform the surgery because I was too exhausted. They presented to the hospital expecting a service, and it was my job to deliver that service. I was just completely forgotten in the operating room. The nursing staff was doing fine. They had a pool of on-call nurses. I was trying to take all the negative experiences going through med school, then as an intern and then as a resident, to help guide me through this. If I could deal with some 50-year-old hothead male throwing scalpels at me, then I could deal with this current situation. I tried calling each surgeon who quit, but none of them answered my calls. I was the stupid one who showed up when all the other surgeons walked out. Now, if I leave, I would be considered abandoning my patients. When I would finish stitching up one person's chest, then I would hear a message that the next trauma victim was on their way. I had 2 minutes to spare, so I walked through the hospital. It was just mass chaos. The hallways were filled with patients who couldn't breathe. I saw the administrator absolutely overwhelmed in the ICU, trying to calm the nurses from walking out from a lack of ventilators. It just felt like a balloon that was going to pop with one more breath of air. There was no one for me to complain to. We are a small, standalone hospital that typically overshadowed by the bigger city hospitals. I knew there was no escape for me in sight. There was no way I was leaving this place anytime soon. It's now been a week and I haven't been able to leave. I nap in the locker room any chance I get. I take showers and I just put new scrubs on. I try not to call my dad because I don't want to worry him. I tried calling every hospital, but they couldn't offer me any assistance. I wish the hospital would just go out of business and shut its doors. I just want to get out of here. The administrator had come to see me a few times and never has any promising news to tell me. It's just empty because that someone is going to come relieve me. But I know there's no one because the administrator tells them the current problem with staffing in the operating room, so the potential surgeon knows that they wouldn't be able to leave like me. The financial problems had been leaked out to the community, so surgeons were also leery of potentially not getting paid. I started using the veterinarian nurses as first assist surgeon. I would have them finish up stitching patients when I felt the patients were stable enough to do so. At this point I really just wanted to be infected with the COVID, because then I would have an excuse to stop working. But I just couldn't take off my mask, because then I would be putting the patients at risk who were in bad shape to begin with. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, it did. It seemed like there were less and less surgical nurses showing up. They had their gripes like the surgeons did, and now they had reached their boiling points. I haven't left this hospital in 2 weeks now. I had called EMS and told them to stop sending patients, but because it's a neighbourhood hospital, the trauma victims would just show up. I'm with one other nurse who can't stop coughing. I know that she is infected with COVID. She has to leave. I am now all alone. The surgical suite consists of no one but me. I have no one to get me a scalpel or an IV bag. It's just me. My face feels like it's been torn off from wearing the mask all the time. I have now crossed over to the twilight zone. There is no one for me to call. The nursing units are on the verge of collapse. The surgical suite is dark and eerie. I am breaking all the rules by not having an anesthesiologist in the operating room with me, because the contracted anesthesiology group had stopped coming once they stopped getting paid by the hospital. Anyone who needs emergency surgery, I continually inject them with the propofol and pain meds. Anyone who could be transferred to another hospital's operating room, then I tell the ED to transfer them. But anyone who arrives to the hospital in severe trauma situations, then I have to try to stabilise them, or else they will just die. There is no one in the operating room but just me. A heart surgery that would require 5 people is reduced to just me. I swear I can hear other people in the operating room with me, but besides the critical patient, I'm the only other person. I'm starting to get paranoid from not being able to sleep for more than 2 consecutive hours. My body and mind have just given up. I can't breathe from wearing the N95 mask, and coffee is no longer working. An emergency room nurse rushes a patient to the operating room, then leaves. The guy has a gunshot wound to his stomach. This is my 3rd consecutive surgery in a row. I was just about to pass out on the locker room bench, but now I can't. The main operating room light has went out and there are only auxiliary lights on now. I try to stop myself from talking to imaginary people in the room. I try everything to stay focused on this dying person in front of me, who is bleeding profusely in front of me. I just started laughing. I see myself at a Rodney Dangerfield concert that my dad used to watch on TV. I go back and forth from laughing to being focused on stopping this patient's bleeding. I inject the patient with more propofol, then I start laughing as I walk to get the sutures. I go to the open glass enclosed supply cabinet and I see my reflection, and I just break down in laughter. I try my hardest to stay focused, but my body is overrun with just pure exhaustion. I pull myself together and stitch this patient back together. I wheel him on the gurney to the ED. I tell the nurse to transfer the resident now to a different hospital because he's stable now. The nurse says okay, and I just start breaking out in laughter and start singing, well, okay, okay, well, okay, okay, well, okay, okay. Nobody laughs along with me. I can barely stand up. I stumble back to the surgical suite as if I was drunk. I put my back against the wall and slide to the floor. I now picture myself in elementary school, talking to the kids around me. I have lost my grip on reality from exhaustion and sleep deprivation. I look down the hallway and I wave to kids that I haven't seen in 20 years. I close my eyes for a minute. Then I hear through the loudspeaker that a level 5 trauma patient had arrived in the ED. I lie on my side on the ground and with my finger I start drawing imaginary shapes while I giggle to myself. I hear a train coming and I start giggling and saying choo choo, chugga chug chug, choo choo. The train sounds closer and closer and I see it come through the surgical suite. The train stops beside me and I squint my eyes. As I squint my eyes, I see an ED nurse in a hyper state alongside a patient on a stretcher. She is urging me to get off the floor by continuously moving her arms towards herself. It looks like she is doing a Hawaiian luau, so I start laughing again. As the nurse continuously moves her arms toward herself, I can start to hear her say, "Get up," in a slow, monotone tone. Then she says, "She's going to die. Come on, get up." I sit myself up there for a few seconds in a trance-like state. Then the nurse grabs me beneath both of my armpits and tries to lift me from the floor. I start to regain my senses and I say, "No, I can't." I feel like I just went through 12 rounds with Mike Tyson in his prime. The nurse says, "You have to, she is going to die." The nurse sits me in a wheelchair and I say, "Push me to the med room." In the med room I give her my hospital ID with the barcode and I tell her to get Ritalin from the electronic dispensing unit. I tell her to give me 150 milligrams, which is 5 times the typical dose. The nurse quickly crushes 2 of the pills and I snort them, which is something that I have never done before. Then I orally ingest the rest of the pills. I get that jolt of energy that makes me coherent and gives me enough energy, though I feel like utter crap from the lack of sleep and exhaustion. I feel like I drank 2 bottles of vodka last night. I tell the nurse to stay and help me and she reluctantly obliges. We bring the patient into the operating room and I instruct the nurse to sanitize her hands by scrubbing in. I tell her to get me things as I sedate the patient. I feel like I'm going to die at any moment. The patient has a ruptured spleen from a car accident, so I cut her open and stop the bleeding. The nurse starts to see me drift off and she says, "The ED is closing today. This will be the last patient. Please pull yourself together." I regain my consciousness and hurry to stitch the patient up. I tell the nurse to call EMS to transfer the patient out because she is stable now. As the nurse wheels the patient away, I collapse on the floor. I wake up 2 days later in the same spot on the operating room floor. I am completely dehydrated from not drinking and my muscles hurt as I attempt to move. I find apple juice and I drink as much as possible. I slowly walk out of the surgical suite in a zombie-like state. My muscles ache in horrific pain. I try to open one of the exit doors and it's locked. I slowly move around the hospital and I realise that all the patients had been transferred out and the ED is closed. I stand by the ED door for a minute in disbelief that the entire hospital has been abandoned. Then I see a fire extinguisher on the wall encased in glass. I get the fire extinguisher and bash the sliding doors of the ED. Eventually the door shatters and I go outside. This is the first time that I have been freed from the hospital in weeks. I go to my car, which is the only one in the parking lot. I don't know why the car wasn't towed away. I think the administrator and everyone else just locked the doors and didn't look back. Amazingly, the car's battery works. I drive to my dad's house and he greets me as I come in. I lay down on his couch and I start hysterically crying as I feel a large burden that had been lifted off my shoulders. Be careful of your child's online virtual learning. Posted by MTP 6921. My pharmaceutical company transferred me to Bucks County, Pennsylvania in June 2020. Reluctantly, I uprooted my 11-year-old daughter Grace from Atlanta, Georgia, and the both of us moved to Pennsylvania because of the pandemic. Grace stayed in the house all summer. My pharmaceutical company was doing well, which unfortunately had me working a lot of hours, so I didn't spend as much time with Grace as I hoped. I wanted Grace to be enrolled in the 6th grade, so I went to the school's district's administration offices. As I pulled up to the school office, a man with a shirt and tie was outside the building with a laptop and said that the building was closed because of the pandemic. I told him about needing to enroll Grace, and he was able to do it on his laptop. He asked me to send Grace's prior school information from Georgia from my email account. The process was easier than I thought it would be. I really just needed to show proof of local residency. I also learned that for at least the next 4 months, all of Grace's classes will be online. This was unfortunate because Grace wouldn't be able to meet any new friends by not being able to go to school in person. I set Grace's room up with a desk and a chair for online school. The first day of school came in September, and I followed all the email links that was sent to me to get Grace situated at the laptop that I gave her. I let Grace use my laptop that I used in Georgia prior to moving to Pennsylvania. I had to go to work during the first day of school, so I got Grace situated and ran out of the house so I wouldn't be late for work. I texted her a couple of times and she stated that she was doing fine. The days turned into weeks and Grace wasn't having any issues. I would get weekly emails from her teacher regarding Grace's status. Fortunately, the teacher said Grace was progressing normally with no issues. Grace's mother died unexpectedly when she was 2, so knowing that she was doing good with the online schooling was a big relief. One Sunday in late November, Grace decided that she wanted to go shopping at the King of Prussia Mall. The mall was completely decked out with Christmas apparel. The mall had temporary vendors located outside of the fixed department stores. Occasionally one of the temporary vendors would guilt you to look at their merchandise with the hope that you'll buy something. As we walked past this one vendor, Grace said, "Dad, hold on, look how cool these are, I'm going to buy one." What caught her eye was Russian nesting figurines, the kind that were made up of some type of wood, where the smaller figurine fits inside the larger ones. She had her own allowance money, so she could buy whatever she wanted. She took out a $20 bill from her pocket and handed it over to the vendor. The vendor had a thick Eastern European accent and gave her $5 back and said, "Blagadori ru vas, thank you." The one thing that caught my eye was, I swore Grace had some type of small SD storage card device in her pocket that she simultaneously handed the vendor with the $20 bill. I knew I saw something, but I didn't want to ruin the moment, and I wasn't 100% sure that I had seen her hand him something. Quite frankly, I was more in shock than anything else. My daughter is 11 years old. I kept asking myself, why would she hand some 50-year unknown stranger a storage device? Grace and I continued to walk around and left the store. About an hour later, during the car ride home, I asked Grace, "So tell me, how's school's going?" Grace said, "It's fine." I then asked, "What subjects do you have?" Grace replied, "History, social studies, maths, Russian." I said, "You're learning Russian in the 6th grade. That's a little odd. What about the typical Spanish or French?" Grace said, "Well, Dad, we learned that there is a large amount of people from Russia in this part of Pennsylvania, so my school thought it would be good to learn the language." I then said, "Oh, well, that makes sense. So what are you learning about in history?" Grace said, "Right now we're learning about the Russian Revolution, including Lenin and Stalin." I responded, "Just this week?" Grace responded, "No, pretty much from the beginning of the school year." I then said, "Anything about Washington or Jefferson or Martin Luther King Jr.?" Grace responded, "No, Dad, just about different Russian people." I felt like I was completely out of the loop. I never bothered to ask her what she was actually learning. I was just so caught up in my job, and when I got the emails from the school that Grace was doing good, I just kind of tuned out her actual schoolwork. Everything that happened today was very alarming to me, with the vendor in the mall, Grace's Russian learning studies, so much so that I brought a camera from Amazon to monitor her online classes. The camera came the following Wednesday, and I installed it late Wednesday night in Grace's room, in a concealed area where she couldn't see it. I could view the recording from my cell phone, and I was shocked at what I discovered the next day. I witnessed via the camera Grace being indoctrinated into some kind of Russian cult following. They had Grace completely brainwashed. I even saw her take a SD card out of the smallest Russian nestled figurine and copy something from her laptop. This is when I really started having doubts that Grace was part of the school district. I think Grace was being used as some type of pawn, and I had completely been duped. For the heck of it, I actually called the school district to ask a question about Grace, and they had zero information on her. I put 2 and 2 together and figured whoever I met in the school's parking lot was just waiting for an unsuspecting idiot like me. I thought the best thing to do was email Grace's teacher and say the school district has no information on Grace, and because of that, what are they doing with my daughter every day? I sent the email, and an hour later I got a response to go to the homepage of Grace's laptop and look under a file called Fired. So I left work a little early that day at about 3 PM and checked Grace's computer that I had given her, and I opened the file name Fired. Once I opened the file, I knew exactly what I was looking at. I had erased all the work files from the laptop prior to giving it to Grace, but I stupidly didn't empty the recycling bin. The information on those files were potential patient secrets that my company had been working on for years, and I would truly get fired if this information was given to a pharmaceutical competitor. I sat at my daughter's desk with both hands on top of my head, pulling out my hair. I had no idea of what to do now. This time I received a text from the unknown teacher who said, "Pretty interesting information in that file, huh?" I then replied, "What do you want from us?" Instead of texting back, I received a phone call from a number I wasn't aware of. I picked up the phone and the caller said, "Mr. Koch." I replied, "What do you want from us?" He replied, "Oh, a man who gets right to the point." I could hear a light Eastern European accent in his tone. Then he said, "I need your daughter to make one more exchange, and in return, I will disappear from your life." I said, "Where is this exchange going to happen?" He told me, "Don't worry about it. The information will be given to Grace, and if in any way you compromise this exchange, then at the very minimum, your work information will be disclosed to your competitors." Once again, this will be at the very minimum of what will happen. I replied, "When will this be over?" He replied, "If you and your daughter do everything that I tell you to do, then within the next few days. Just remember what I told you, that if you compromise the exchange in any way by going to the authorities, then I will never go away. By Mr. Koch." It didn't take a genius to figure out that Grace was being used as a go-between for some type of Eastern European terrorist ring. If they were to communicate directly with each other, then every US counterintelligence agency would know the terrorist links within the country. So to get around this, they are using an 11-year-old girl who is the furthest from being on anybody's radar. I am now more in fear for Grace's safety than losing my job. I look online about past scenarios of dealings with the Russians. Then it came to passing information. I was sweating as I read each story because it seemed like the Russians sever all ties with the mule once they're done with them, which is usually done with cyanide poisoning, so there would be no witnesses and no trace of linking the Russian operatives. As I sat at Grace's desk, I can hear her in the living room watching television. I went through all the different options in my head of what I should do. I kept slightly hitting my forehead with the ball of my fist. I knew that I couldn't leave Grace home alone anymore. I knew that the Russian operatives had more information on me regarding my name, social security number, everywhere that I previously lived, and so on. I thought to myself that even if Grace followed exactly what they wanted, then we would either be killed or the rest of our lives we would be looking over our shoulders. Both Grace and I saw the man at the mall already, so we knew more information than we should know. I remembered seeing those billboards. If you see or know something suspicious, then call the 1-800 number. So I figured I would block my phone number and call the number. I found the 1-800 number online and I called it. Without giving away any personal identifying information, I told the person of the situation. I was transferred several times until I actually spoke to someone from the CIA. The person's name was Agent Hebert, who worked out of the Philadelphia field office. I once again explained the scenario without giving away any personal identifying information. The agent was aware of these types of scenarios where terrorists would use virtually anyone as an unknowing carrier. Agent Hebert advised me to basically leave the house with my daughter right now. As Agent Hebert said that, I received a text from the Russian operative that said, "Look out your daughter's window. Do you see that white van?" I felt my stomach hit the floor when I saw the van parked in front of my house, with two men sitting in the driver and passenger seats. I am now terrified that my house will be bombarded with terrorists at any moment. I responded back, "Yeah, what do you want?" He texted back, "I told you to keep your mouth shut. You're a stupid man. Don't you realise the laptop has a built-in microphone? I heard all of your conversations with the US government officials." I hung up the phone with Agent Hebert and I started hitting my head with my fist because I did do something stupid by not leaving my daughter's room when I called the government officials. The Russian operative then called me. I answered the phone and he said, "Mr. Koch, you have 30 seconds to do exactly what I tell you to do. Grab the Russian figurines that your daughter bought at the mall and go to the mall and return it to the same vendor. Your daughter stays in the house." Then he hung up the phone. I ran towards my daughter in the living room and I said, "Go put your jacket on and go out through the back basement door and run to the park where I will meet you in 1 minute. Grace said, "Why, Daddy?" I said, "Honey, please, just do it." Grace was completely oblivious to everything that was happening. She is just a kid whose teacher was telling her to do stuff which she thought all kids her age were doing. I went out the front door and the two men in the white van watched me as I held the wooden figurines in my hand. My only chance was that they thought that Grace was still in the house. I got in my car and drove away towards the park. I cried in relief when I saw her waiting for me. I proceeded with Grace to the mall, which is about a 25-minute drive. The whole drive, I had both hands tightly gripped on the steering wheel. I was dripping sweat from absolute fear I was experiencing. I was looking in the rear view mirror the whole time to see if I was being followed. Other than saying, "Dad, why did I have to run to the park?" Grace just sat and played with her phone the whole drive. I responded to Grace just because. I pulled into the King of Prussia mall and parked. I figured it was best to have Grace stay in the fragrance aisle of Macy's, where there were always a ton of people around, while I went to return the Russian figurines. I really didn't want to leave Grace alone, but I really had no other option. I quickly walked over to the vendor with the figurine. I said, "I want to return this." He took the figurine and attempted to give me my money back, which I declined because I didn't know if cyanide or some other poison was on it. Then I quickly walked back to Macy's and I cried in relief when I saw Grace standing by the fragrances playing with her phone. We both headed to my car. As I drove away, I said, "Give me your phone." Grace handed me her phone and I threw it out the window. Grace got upset, so I gave her my phone. I had to assume her teacher was going to text her eventually. About 5 minutes later, Grace said, "Daddy, you just got a message from my teacher, Mr. Gorski. I then took my phone and threw it out the window. My grandparents owned a cabin in the middle of nowhere in Georgia, so I got on 95 South and headed in that direction. And that's it for tonight, my little hellhounds. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to check out the links below. If you have any scary stories you want narrated on the channel, then submit them to Reddit r/homeofscares and follow me on Twitter at homeofscares. Now, good night, my little hellhounds.